Hey everybody, this is Sleepy Crime, and today I'm gonna help you. I know you want to fall asleep to this video, so before you do, put a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. By the way, where are you from and what time are you watching? Make yourself comfortable and relax. Nancy Laura Spungen was born on February 27, 1958, at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital in Philadelphia. Her delivery was complicated. Deborah Spungen, her mother, had experienced a difficult pregnancy. When Nancy finally arrived, she had turned blue due to oxygen deprivation and required resuscitation. Medical staff initially assured the Spungens that no lasting harm was expected, but troubling signs emerged quickly. From the outset, Nancy was unusually difficult. She cried incessantly, often for hours without relief, and reacted violently to touch and stimuli. Unlike other infants, she showed little interest in being held or comforted. Deborah and her husband Frank, who already had one child, Susan, sensed something was different but couldn't find concrete answers. Deborah sought medical advice early and often. Doctors initially dismissed the symptoms as colic or parental overanxiety. But by 6 months old, Nancy was exhibiting behavior well outside the norm. Her motor development was advanced. She sat up, crawled, and walked early. But her emotional development lagged. She had wild, unpredictable tantrums, screamed for hours, and displayed aggressive behavior, including hitting and biting. As Nancy grew, the gap between her and other children widened. At nursery school, she was disruptive and prone to fits of rage. She pushed other children, destroyed toys, and struggled with authority. By kindergarten, her expulsions began. Teachers described her as uncontrollable. Though highly intelligent, Nancy's emotional volatility made it nearly impossible for her to function in structured environments. Deborah and Frank Spungen were at a loss. They consulted a range of specialists, child psychologists, psychiatrists, neurologists, but received conflicting opinions. Some suggested hyperactivity. Others suspected early signs of a personality disorder. Medication was tried with little success. At home, the situation was chaotic. Nancy frequently attacked her younger brother, David, and her sister Susan lived in fear. Deborah once recounted an incident where a 6-year-old Nancy held a pair of scissors to her sibling's throat, calmly stating she wanted to see what would happen. Throughout her early childhood, Nancy cycled through various schools and programs. At times, the Spungens enrolled her in experimental or alternative educational settings. None brought lasting improvement. By age 9, she had begun threatening suicide. She seemed alternately desperate for help and furious at the world. The family's life revolved around Nancy's needs and crises. Vacations were canceled, social connections frayed, and the house was filled with tension. Deborah chronicled this period in detail in her memoir, "And I Don't Want to Live This Life," describing the helplessness she felt as she watched her daughter spiral further out of control despite every effort to intervene. Nancy's volatile early years set the stage for the tumultuous life that followed. Her behavior defied conventional diagnoses at the time, and the medical understanding of childhood mental illness in the 1960s was limited. For the Spungens, these early years were not just the beginning of Nancy's troubled journey, but the beginning of their transformation into advocates and survivors of a uniquely painful ordeal. By the time Nancy turned 11, her behavior had grown more unpredictable and violent. She was expelled from multiple schools for disruptive and aggressive conduct. At home, she raged against her parents, attacked her siblings, and expressed fantasies of death and destruction. Deborah and Frank Spungen, increasingly desperate, intensified their search for answers. Professional evaluations during the early 1970s were conflicting and inconclusive. Some doctors suspected brain damage. Others suggested minimal brain dysfunction, now understood as a broad term for neurodevelopmental disorders. Nancy was prescribed medications ranging from stimulants to tranquilizers, but these offered limited relief and introduced new problems. Nancy's adolescence was marked by even deeper psychological instability. At age 14, she made her first known suicide attempt by slashing her wrists with a pair of scissors. She was admitted to Philadelphia's Children's Hospital for psychiatric evaluation. Over the following years, she would be hospitalized repeatedly, sometimes voluntarily, other times under court order. At 15, Nancy was formally diagnosed with schizophrenia, a rare diagnosis for someone so young. Later evaluations questioned this, suggesting manic depression, bipolar disorder, or borderline personality disorder might have been more accurate. Regardless, she remained a high-risk patient, intelligent but erratic, manipulative yet vulnerable. She began threatening to kill herself or others with increasing frequency. Deborah and Frank tried private institutions, therapists, medications, and structured home environments. In each case, Nancy would improve briefly, then spiral back into crisis. Her interactions were marked by paranoia, explosive anger, and a fierce desire for control. Nancy's mental illness took a heavy toll on the entire family. Deborah described living in a state of near constant anxiety, watching her daughter carefully for signs of escalation. Frank retreated emotionally, and Susan and David grew up in an atmosphere of tension and fear. Deborah later wrote that she had begun to feel as though her life no longer belonged to her. It revolved around managing Nancy's next outburst, hospital stay, or suicide threat. By 16, Nancy was living in group homes and psychiatric facilities, cycling in and out depending on her behavior. Though she sometimes seemed to crave help, she often lashed out at caregivers. Deborah remained her fiercest advocate, pleading with institutions not to discharge her prematurely and trying to secure consistent care. Despite the turmoil, Nancy had moments of lucidity and insight. She knew she was sick and sometimes expressed guilt about what she put her family through. But those moments were fleeting. More often, she viewed herself as someone persecuted and misunderstood. She once told her mother she felt as if she didn't belong on this planet. By the end of her teenage years, Nancy's presence in the home became untenable. Her violence had escalated to dangerous levels. She pulled knives on her siblings, set fires, and routinely ran away. In 1975, shortly after her 17th birthday, she left home for good. The next time she returned to Philadelphia, it would be in a coffin. Nancy Spungen's early life, punctuated by mental illness and repeated attempts to find treatment, remains a devastating chronicle of a family's struggle against a system ill-equipped to handle complex psychiatric needs. For Deborah, the diagnosis had brought little relief. Understanding what was wrong with Nancy had not led to solutions, only to the grim realization that the worst might still lie ahead. In early 1975, just after turning 17, Nancy Spungen left Philadelphia for good. Her departure was not a sudden act of rebellion, but the culmination of years of instability, failed interventions, and institutional breakdowns. Her parents, Deborah and Frank, were emotionally exhausted. While they feared for her safety, they also acknowledged they could no longer keep her or their other children safe with Nancy at home. Nancy enrolled briefly at the University of Colorado at Boulder. Her acceptance was conditional, following a high school equivalency diploma. However, within a few months, she was expelled for erratic behavior and suspected drug use. Nancy returned briefly to the East Coast, but soon set her sights on New York City. By mid-1975, Nancy had immersed herself in Manhattan's East Village, particularly around the then-nascent punk rock scene. She worked sporadically as a stripper and sex worker. She frequented clubs like CBGB, the epicenter of American punk, where bands like the Ramones, Television, and Patti Smith were beginning to gain recognition. Nancy became known among musicians, roadies, and artists. She was aggressive, bold, and unapologetic, qualities that both attracted and alienated those around her. Nancy's involvement with the music scene deepened as she connected with bands like the New York Dolls and Aerosmith. She cultivated a reputation as a band-aid, someone who offered more than fan worship. She provided access to drugs and connections, managed contacts, and occasionally served as a go-between for gigs or housing. Some acquaintances later recalled that Nancy seemed to operate with a strange charisma, troubled but compelling, broken yet magnetic. Her drug use increased during this period. Nancy became addicted to heroin, adding to her volatile psychological profile. Friends and musicians noted frequent mood swings, self-harm scars, and manic episodes. Still, she moved deeper into the scene, often turning up backstage or living in borrowed apartments. Nancy's family had sporadic contact with her during these years. Deborah tried to maintain some thread of communication, sending letters, wiring money, urging her to come home. But Nancy was determined to carve out a space for herself far from the constraints of her past. She rejected traditional roles and embraced the chaos of the New York underground. It was during this period that she adopted a new persona, one defined by black leather, bleached hair, heavy makeup, and a hardened attitude. She was no longer the suburban girl with a psychiatric record. In New York, Nancy was a punk provocateur, a self-fashioned symbol of defiance. The psychological toll of this transition was immense. Behind the tough exterior, Nancy's behavior grew more erratic. She was frequently homeless, sometimes hospitalized, and often in danger. Still, she found in the punk world a kind of legitimacy she had never experienced elsewhere. In a scene that rejected the mainstream, Nancy's instability made her a fitting, if tragic, figure. By 1976, Nancy began making trips to London, drawn by the rise of punk in the UK. Her focus shifted toward the Sex Pistols, whose anti-establishment ethos and rising notoriety resonated deeply with her. It was in London that she would meet Sid Vicious, then still known as John Simon Ritchie, a bassist whose path would soon become inextricably linked with hers. Nancy's departure from Philadelphia had been both a flight from pain and a quest for identity. In New York, she found acceptance but also descended further into addiction and instability. What lay ahead would only deepen the tragedy she had long seemed to anticipate. By late 1976, Nancy Spungen had embedded herself in the heart of London's punk rock movement. Having grown disillusioned with the New York scene, she sought new ground and greater notoriety abroad. She arrived in London with a singular goal: to connect with the Sex Pistols. Her initial infatuation was with lead singer Johnny Rotten, but he dismissed her advances. It was instead Sid Vicious, the band's recently appointed bassist, who took interest in her. Sid, born John Simon Ritchie, was 19 and known for his self-destructive tendencies and lack of musical ability. His induction into the Sex Pistols had been based more on image than talent. The pairing of Sid and Nancy, both volatile and drug-dependent, quickly evolved into a deeply toxic bond. They became inseparable almost immediately. Nancy, already known for her brash demeanor and open drug use, quickly moved in with Sid. She assumed the role of his unofficial manager, booking interviews and gigs, though few materialized. Her influence on Sid grew steadily. He began using heroin heavily under her guidance. Friends of the band claimed Nancy encouraged his addiction, while others saw them as codependent enablers. The Sex Pistols manager, Malcolm McLaren, was wary of Nancy. He and others in the band's orbit viewed her as a destabilizing force, referring to her disparagingly as nauseating Nancy. Tensions grew within the band. Johnny Rotten blamed her for Sid's increasing unreliability, while McLaren attempted to distance the couple from official business. Despite this, Sid and Nancy clung to each other with intensity. Their relationship was marked by frequent public arguments, physical fights, and scenes of emotional chaos. Their hotel rooms were trashed, their drug use rampant, and their behavior erratic. Nancy's presence in London's punk scene was divisive. Some admired her boldness, others feared her volatility. By early 1978, the Sex Pistols were unraveling. The band's U.S. tour was a disaster, culminating in a final performance in San Francisco on January 14th. Following the breakup, Sid returned to New York with Nancy. They moved into the Chelsea Hotel, a storied residence known for housing artists, writers, and musicians, including past tenants like Dylan Thomas and Bob Dylan. The hotel would become the final stage of their destructive love story. In London, Nancy had achieved her goal of becoming part of punk's inner circle, but the cost was high. Sid Vicious's transformation from a volatile punk mascot into a hollowed-out addict accelerated under her influence. Nancy herself was increasingly isolated, alienated from friends and estranged from her family. She had traded one chaotic scene for another, carrying with her the same instability that had marked her entire life. Their time in London was short-lived but critical. It cemented their relationship, deepened their addictions, and set the stage for the tragic events to come. In the whirlwind of punk rebellion, Sid and Nancy became symbols of defiance and destruction. But behind the image was a reality shaped by untreated mental illness, substance abuse, and emotional deterioration. In the spring of 1978, Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen took up residence in room 100 of the Chelsea Hotel in Manhattan. The hotel had long been a refuge for artists and musicians, but for Sid and Nancy, it became a site of escalating isolation and dysfunction. Their lives there revolved almost entirely around heroin, methadone, Tuinol, and violence. Sid was attempting to forge a solo career after the Sex Pistols disbanded. He played occasional gigs, including a brief appearance at Max's Kansas City. Nancy declared herself his manager, though there were few professional outcomes. Most days were spent holed up in their room, curtains drawn, money draining, and needles in hand. Hotel staff and residents described the couple as disruptive and visibly deteriorating. Their room was chaotic, cluttered with drug paraphernalia, stained mattresses, and broken furniture. Fights between them were frequent and loud. Neighbors reported hearing screaming, objects being thrown, and crashing sounds at all hours. Despite these disturbances, police were rarely called. Nancy had become increasingly paranoid and unstable. Her behavior grew erratic, marked by mood swings and aggression. She called her mother regularly, sometimes pleading for help, other times ranting incoherently. Deborah Spungen later wrote that she felt helpless, unable to reach her daughter or trust that Nancy wanted saving. Their funds came from various sources: pawned items, Sid's dwindling performance fees, and money wired from Nancy's family. Deborah occasionally sent money, hoping it might keep Nancy alive, but most of it went to drugs. Nancy would frequently call drug dealers to their room, sometimes paying in cash, other times with Sid's belongings. Friends tried to intervene. Some, like photographer Roberta Bailey, visited and expressed concern, but found Nancy combative and Sid dazed. One acquaintance described the room as a war zone, where love, rage, and addiction formed a toxic triangle. The couple's physical appearance reflected their decline. Sid was emaciated, with abscesses on his arms, and Nancy's skin was sallow, with bruises and scars visible. In September, things worsened. Sid was arrested for smashing a glass bottle over Todd Smith's head during a fight at a local club. Nancy paid his bail, and the charges were dropped, but it marked an uptick in violence that seemed ever closer to implosion. Nancy told friends she feared Sid might kill her, but also insisted she couldn't live without him. On October 11, 1978, hotel staff noted a particularly violent argument from room 100. Screaming and thuds continued into the early hours of October 12th. Several residents later stated they heard groaning and someone crying for help. No one intervened. The next morning, at around 10 a.m., Sid Vicious called the front desk in a daze. Nancy was found in the bathroom, slumped under the sink, in a pool of blood. A single stab wound to her abdomen. She was 20 years old. A knife matching one Sid had recently purchased was recovered at the scene. The Chelsea Hotel had become a mausoleum to the couple's descent. In just a few months, Sid and Nancy had moved from punk royalty to tragic tabloid figures. What had once been styled as rebellion now revealed itself as untreated mental illness, rampant addiction, and deep despair. On the morning of October 12, 1978, a call from room 100 at the Chelsea Hotel sent staff rushing. When they arrived, Nancy Spungen was found dead in the bathroom. She lay under the sink, dressed in a black bra and underwear, with a single stab wound to her lower abdomen. A trail of blood extended from the bed to the bathroom. She was 20 years old. Sid Vicious, barely conscious and in shock, was taken into custody by the NYPD. He initially confessed, stating, "I did it because I'm a dirty dog." But hours later, he retracted his statement, claiming he had no memory of the night. Police recovered a blood-stained hunting knife, purchased days earlier by Sid, with his fingerprints on it. He was charged with second-degree murder and held at Rikers Island on $50,000 bail. In the days that followed, conflicting accounts emerged. Sid claimed he had taken Tuinal and was too sedated to know what had happened. Other residents of the Chelsea Hotel reported hearing yelling and a struggle throughout the night. Several said Nancy had been heard crying out in pain and asking for help, but no one intervened. Others mentioned a known drug dealer visiting the room hours before Nancy's body was found. Investigators considered alternate theories, including the possibility that Nancy had been killed by someone else during a drug deal gone wrong. However, no physical evidence supported another assailant's presence. The chaotic condition of the room, smeared blood, discarded syringes, and open suitcases made a definitive timeline difficult. Nancy's body was flown back to Philadelphia. Her family, devastated, buried her at King David Memorial Park. Deborah later recalled seeing Nancy's face in the morgue and noticing bruises and cuts that suggested prolonged abuse. Though she had long feared a tragic end for her daughter, the reality was no less shocking. Meanwhile, Sid remained in legal limbo. On October 22nd, after 10 days in jail, Virgin Records posted his bail. He was released but continued spiraling. That same night, he was arrested again after attacking Patti Smith's brother Todd with a broken bottle. Sent back to Rikers Island, Sid attempted suicide by slashing his wrists with a broken light bulb and trying to hang himself with a bedsheet. He survived and was placed in a psychiatric ward. The media swarmed the case, painting Sid and Nancy as a modern-day Romeo and Juliet, undone by heroin and punk nihilism. Their story, already mythologized by fans, now became a spectacle. The press fixated on Nancy's mental health history, often depicting her as unstable and toxic, while Sid was portrayed alternately as a tragic anti-hero or dangerous addict. In private, Deborah Spungen began documenting everything: police reports, press clippings, and personal memories. She sought answers but found only contradictions. Nancy's death certificate listed cause of death as stab wound to the abdomen, but who inflicted it and under what circumstances remained uncertain. Despite public attention, the legal case moved slowly. The district attorney's office had limited evidence beyond Sid's initial confession and the knife. Questions lingered. Did Sid kill Nancy in a drug-fueled haze? Did Nancy stab herself, as some speculated? Or had a third party been involved? None of these were resolved in court. As the investigation stalled, so did any sense of justice for Nancy. For her family, the loss was compounded by the relentless media coverage, which reduced their daughter to a caricature, an appendage to Sid Vicious, rather than a human being. Deborah would later say that the worst part was knowing her daughter died, afraid and alone. Sid Vicious never stood trial for the murder of Nancy Spungen. On February 1st, 1979, less than 4 months after her death, he died of a heroin overdose at a party in Manhattan. He had just been released from Rikers Island earlier that day. The dose that killed him was supplied by his mother, Anne Beverly, who later admitted she had hoped to give him one last high to celebrate his freedom. Sid's death closed the case without resolution. With no trial, no witness testimonies, and no cross-examinations, the exact circumstances of Nancy's death remained officially unproven. The district attorney's office formally dropped charges posthumously. Theories abounded. Some still claimed Sid confessed. Others insisted he was framed, or that Nancy stabbed herself. No definitive account emerged. For the Spungen family, grief became a public experience. Deborah and Frank were thrust into the spotlight, their daughter's image plastered across tabloids. Much of the coverage painted Nancy as a destructive groupie. Her mental illness and troubled past were sensationalized, often with little compassion or context. Deborah, outraged by these portrayals, began writing her own account. In 1983, she published And I Don't Want to Live This Life, a mother's story of her daughter's murder, a raw memoir chronicling Nancy's troubled childhood, the family's desperate attempts at intervention, and the devastation that followed her death. The title echoed a note Nancy had once written during a psychiatric crisis. The book offered a counter-narrative, Nancy not as a punk footnote, but as a mentally ill young woman failed by a system unequipped to support her. Deborah's work extended beyond the page. She became an advocate for families of murder victims and those affected by severe mental illness. In 1983, she co-founded the Philadelphia chapter of Families of Murder Victims, an organization offering resources and support for those navigating the criminal justice system after a loss. She also spoke publicly about the gaps in mental health care, calling for early intervention and systemic reform. Through the 1980s and beyond, Deborah appeared in interviews, documentaries, and panels, refusing to let Nancy's life be defined solely by her association with Sid Vicious. She spoke candidly about her own failures and fears, about the judgment faced by families of the mentally ill, and about the long, complex path through grief. Over time, public perceptions of Nancy shifted. Documentaries like Sad Vacation, 2016, and other retrospectives on the punk era revisited her story with more nuance. While the mythology of Sid and Nancy persisted, immortalized in music, fashion, and film, the real Nancy emerged more fully. A troubled young woman, deeply intelligent, fiercely emotional, and ultimately consumed by illness and addiction. Nancy's grave in Pennsylvania bears a simple inscription, "Our daughter." For Deborah, writing the memoir and advocating for others became acts of preservation and resistance. In telling Nancy's story, she refused to let her daughter disappear behind the spectacle of punk tragedy. Today, the legacy of Nancy Spungen is tangled in the legacy of punk itself. But at the heart of it remains a story of a family shattered by mental illness, a young life lost to violence, and a mother's fight to reclaim her daughter's humanity. Nancy Moyer, a 36-year-old state employee and devoted mother of two, lived a quiet life in Tenino, Washington. Separated from her husband but maintaining a cordial relationship, Nancy shared custody of their daughters. On March 6, 2009, she returned home after dropping off her children with her ex-husband for the weekend. That evening, she did some shopping and returned home. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Nancy. The following Monday, March 9th, Nancy failed to show up for work at the Department of Ecology. Concerned by her uncharacteristic absence, co-workers attempted to reach her. Receiving no response, they contacted authorities. When police arrived at Nancy's residence, her front door was ajar. Her car was in the driveway, purse inside. A partially consumed glass of wine and a still-running television suggested she had been interrupted during a quiet evening at home. Nothing indicated a forced entry or struggle, yet the scene was unsettling. Family and friends were adamant. Nancy would not abandon her children or job. Her ex-husband confirmed she had been in good spirits during the child exchange earlier that day. Police launched a missing persons investigation, interviewing neighbors and canvassing the area. Dogs were brought in, and the nearby terrain was searched. Despite these efforts, no substantial clues surfaced. Initial leads were sparse. A neighbor recalled hearing a car door slam that Friday evening, but no one reported seeing or hearing anything unusual beyond that. The lack of evidence complicated the investigation. With few tangible leads, suspicion began to mount, but with no signs of foul play, authorities found themselves at an impasse. As the days turned into weeks, the community of Tenino grew increasingly anxious. Flyers went up, vigils were held. Nancy's disappearance, seemingly without trace, became a haunting mystery. Law enforcement continued interviews and combed through her personal and professional life, but found nothing to indicate why or how she had vanished. Her case would remain open but unsolved, becoming one of Washington's most perplexing disappearances. With Nancy Moyer missing and few immediate clues, investigators intensified their efforts. Thurston County Sheriff's Office led the case, treating it as a missing persons investigation with suspicious circumstances. Detectives searched Nancy's home thoroughly. Nothing was stolen, no signs of a struggle were present, and her bedroom was undisturbed. The only items out of place were the half-full wine glass, her purse left in the living room, and the car keys still inside. Family, friends, and co-workers were interviewed. Nancy's ex-husband, Bill Moyer, cooperated fully with authorities. He confirmed dropping off their daughters and returning to his home, where he stayed the entire weekend. His alibi checked out. Nancy's co-workers described her as dependable and content. No one recalled her expressing fear or mentioning any concerns. Detectives examined phone records and computer activity. Her phone had been turned off on the night of her disappearance, with no calls or texts providing clues. Her bank accounts remained untouched. No purchases or withdrawals had been made after March 6th. As the days passed, suspicion began to focus on her social circle. Detectives spoke with local residents, including neighbors and acquaintances. One neighbor mentioned seeing a car parked outside her home late that Friday evening, but could not provide a description. A friend reported Nancy had recently started casually dating, though no specific person was named. The media began reporting on her disappearance, urging anyone with information to come forward. Volunteers organized search parties, covering wooded areas near Tenino. Dogs were brought in to trace her scent, but had limited success. The terrain made searching difficult, and no physical evidence turned up. By April 2009, weeks after Nancy vanished, the case had grown cold. The lack of physical evidence, credible witness accounts, or digital trails left investigators without a clear direction. They continued to treat the case as a suspicious disappearance, and her family feared the worst. Nancy's daughters remained in the care of their father as the community held on to hope. Despite the attention, no suspect emerged and no new evidence surfaced. The investigation remained active but stagnant. Every few months, detectives would re-interview individuals and re-examine case files, but nothing substantial developed. Nancy's case quietly joined the long list of unsolved disappearances, haunting her family and community. By the summer of 2009, 3 months after Nancy Moyer vanished, active leads had all but dried up. Detectives had followed every tip, conducted dozens of interviews, and coordinated ground searches with dogs and volunteers. Yet, the case remained stalled. No suspects, no forensic evidence, and no clear motive emerged. Nancy had simply disappeared, leaving behind a mystery that would grip the Tenino community for years. Thurston County Sheriff's Office maintained an open file, and investigators reviewed it periodically. The lack of forced entry, stolen items, or indications of violence complicated matters. They considered various scenarios: voluntary disappearance, abduction, or foul play by someone she knew. But there was no proof to support any theory conclusively. Bill Moyer continued to cooperate and focused on raising their daughters. Nancy's family and friends kept her story alive through community events, social media outreach, and media interviews. They maintained that Nancy would never leave her children and insisted that someone out there had answers. In the absence of new evidence, public interest waned. Her story appeared occasionally in local news, often as part of broader features on cold cases. Each time, investigators hoped renewed publicity would generate tips, but none led to breakthroughs. Behind the scenes, detectives preserved evidence, maintained contacts with her family, and updated the case whenever minor developments occurred. Despite their efforts, the file grew quiet. Other cases took priority, and Nancy's disappearance faded from headlines. Yet, within the community, she was not forgotten. Neighbors continued to speculate, recalling the eerie silence of that March weekend. Some believed she had been taken by someone she trusted. Others theorized a random encounter gone wrong. Still, no evidence supported any theory more than the next. Years passed. Nancy's daughters grew up, her house was sold, and new residents moved in. But the Moyer family marked every passing anniversary with renewed calls for information. Despite their pain, they clung to hope that someone, someday, would break their silence. The cold case remained open but stagnant, one of many files collecting dust in a cabinet at the Thurston County Sheriff's Office, waiting for a tip, a confession, or a trace of evidence to bring answers. A decade after Nancy Moyer's disappearance, the case drew fresh attention. In 2018, investigative journalist James Bays began researching cold cases in Washington for a new true crime podcast. Intrigued by the details and lack of resolution in Nancy's case, he chose it as the focus of the first season of Hide and Seek. The podcast launched in 2019, rekindling public interest and shining a national spotlight on the long-dormant mystery. Listeners heard Nancy's story through interviews with family, friends, and investigators. The podcast detailed the timeline of her last known movements, the discovery of her empty house, and the lack of clues. It also explored previously unreported aspects of the case, such as local rumors, overlooked leads, and the emotional toll on her loved ones. The release of Hide and Seek generated renewed calls to law enforcement and tips from the public. Thurston County investigators, encouraged by the attention, began re-examining case files and following up on new information. Some tips came from individuals who had never spoken to police before. While many led nowhere, one tip in July 2019 stood out. A man named Eric Roberts, who lived near Nancy in 2009, contacted authorities. During the conversation, he made a startling claim. He had killed Nancy Moyer. He said it happened during a rough sexual encounter at his home, and that he had accidentally strangled her. He claimed he had panicked and disposed of her body. Detectives recorded the statement and obtained a warrant to search his property. Law enforcement arrived at Roberts' home with search dogs and forensic teams. They combed the house and surrounding land for any trace of Nancy. During the search, Roberts recanted his confession. He claimed he had been drinking heavily and made it up. No physical evidence was found to link him to Nancy's disappearance. Despite the retraction, his confession raised significant questions. He had not been a suspect during the original investigation. Detectives interviewed him again, but without corroborating evidence. They could not make an arrest. The prosecutor declined to press charges, citing the unreliability of the confession and the lack of supporting forensic proof. Still, the podcast's impact was undeniable. Public engagement surged. Nancy's name returned to the headlines. Her family expressed both hope and frustration, grateful for renewed attention, but still waiting for answers. The Hide and Seek series brought national awareness, spurred police action, and reawakened a cold case that had long been dormant. Eric Roberts' confession in July 2019 marked the most significant development in the Nancy Moyer case in a decade. A former neighbor and acquaintance, Roberts had not been publicly associated with the case until then. His phone call to law enforcement was chilling. He claimed responsibility for Nancy's death, stating it occurred during a consensual encounter that turned fatal. According to the initial confession, Nancy had come to his house willingly. He alleged they had been drinking and engaged in erotic asphyxiation, during which she accidentally died. He told detectives he had panicked, moved her body, and concealed it. His tone was calm and detached. Investigators immediately obtained a warrant to search his property in Tenino, near where Nancy had last been seen. Thurston County deputies arrived with search dogs and equipment. They spent several days combing the residence and its surroundings. The investigation was meticulous. Cadaver dogs alerted to specific areas, but no human remains were recovered. Forensic teams collected samples, reviewed old case files, and analyzed the confession for consistency. Shortly after the search began, Roberts recanted his confession. In a follow-up interview, he claimed intoxication and stress had led him to fabricate the story. He said he had no involvement in Nancy's disappearance. Detectives were left with a partial, uncorroborated confession and no physical evidence linking him to the case. Despite the lack of charges, law enforcement considered him a person of interest. The search raised new questions. Why would he confess if uninvolved? Could his story contain partial truths? Or had he simply sought attention during a moment of instability? Without answers, prosecutors found no legal basis to proceed. The public reaction was swift and divided. Some believed Roberts had revealed the truth but evaded justice due to the absence of hard evidence. Others viewed his behavior as reckless and harmful, dragging the Moyer family through renewed trauma. Nancy's daughters, now young adults, expressed deep frustration. The brief moment of hope had ended in disappointment. Though Roberts' confession didn't resolve the case, it re-energized law enforcement and public interest. Investigators re-interviewed old witnesses and reviewed past statements in light of the new development. While the confession failed to bring closure, it reinforced a critical fact. Nancy's case was not forgotten. The confession and its aftermath became a focal point of later episodes in the Hide and Seek podcast, further amplifying awareness and community involvement. Though the outcome was inconclusive, it proved that attention and public engagement could shake loose even the most static cold cases. Following the brief uproar over Eric Roberts' confession and retraction, the investigation into Nancy Moyer's disappearance entered a new, more methodical phase. The Thurston County Sheriff's Office, buoyed by national interest and public engagement, redoubled its commitment to solving the case. While the confession had not resulted in charges, it renewed momentum for re-examining the evidence, witnesses, and timeline. Detectives began by revisiting the original case files. They reviewed interviews, re-verified alibis, and compared initial witness statements with later accounts. They looked for inconsistencies, overlooked details, or names that had appeared more than once. Advances in forensic technology were considered. Items collected from Nancy's home were re-evaluated to determine whether modern testing could yield new results. Investigators also returned to the community. They re-interviewed neighbors and former acquaintances of Nancy and Roberts. In doing so, they uncovered small but potentially useful details. Comments made in passing, unusual behavior noted at the time, or informal conversations never previously documented. While none of this amounted to direct evidence, it helped refine the timeline and social web surrounding the case. At the same time, community-led efforts gained traction. Inspired by the Hide and Seek podcast and growing online discussions, amateur sleuths and true crime followers combed through public records and archived news. Some contacted the sheriff's office with observations or theories. A few tips were forwarded to detectives, who evaluated each on merit. Most led nowhere, but each was taken seriously. One of the most valuable aspects of this renewed attention was the humanizing of Nancy's story. Media portrayals emphasized her role as a mother, employee, and friend. Instead of focusing solely on the disappearance, coverage began to highlight the personal and emotional void left in the wake of her absence. This shift helped maintain public empathy and prevented the case from fading into obscurity again. Detectives also worked with nonprofit groups specializing in missing persons. Organizations like the Doe Network and NAMUS offered resources, exposure, and a broader network of investigators and volunteers. The collaboration helped keep Nancy's case visible across law enforcement databases and national missing person bulletins. Despite the enhanced efforts, no definitive evidence or suspect emerged. Law enforcement remained cautious, constrained by legal standards and the risk of compromising the investigation. They continued to consider all possibilities, from accidental death to deliberate harm. The lack of closure was deeply frustrating to those closest to Nancy. Still, her case stood as a model of how persistence, media collaboration, and community engagement could breathe life into cold cases. It became clear that solving the disappearance of Nancy Moyer would require not only investigative skill, but also continued public vigilance, and a crucial missing piece yet to surface: More than a decade after Nancy Moyer vanished from her home in Tenino, Washington, her case remains unsolved. The passage of time has brought no definitive answers, yet the commitment to uncovering the truth has never faded. Her disappearance, seemingly without violence or motive, continues to challenge investigators and haunt her family and community. Today, Nancy's case is still open and classified as a missing person with suspicious circumstances. Law enforcement maintains periodic reviews, guided by any new tip, lead, or technological advancement that could shift the trajectory of the investigation. Her DNA, dental records, and other identifying details remain in national databases. Each unidentified body that turns up in Washington or nearby states is checked against her profile. The role of media, especially the Hide and Seek podcast, proved instrumental in revitalizing interest. It demonstrated the power of storytelling and citizen engagement to influence real-world investigations. Thanks to the podcast, thousands of people learned about Nancy's life, her disappearance, and the open questions that remain. It brought attention not just to her case, but to the broader challenges faced in investigating adult missing persons, particularly when no crime scene, witnesses, or physical evidence are present. Nancy's daughters, now adults, have grown up in the shadow of unanswered questions. In interviews, they speak about their mother not only as a missing person, but as a parent they lost in every sense. They remember her warmth, humor, and dedication to them. Every birthday, holiday, and anniversary marks not only the passage of time, but the continued absence of justice. Law enforcement has remained clear. The case is solvable. What they need is new information, something withheld, overlooked, or long forgotten. Cold cases often hinge on the smallest detail finally being revealed. A conversation, a tip, or even a confession reconsidered in light of other facts could change everything. As of now, no one has been charged in connection with Nancy's disappearance. Eric Roberts remains a person of interest, but without new evidence, prosecutors cannot move forward. He has not commented further since his 2019 confession and retraction. The search for truth continues. Nancy Moyer's story endures not only as a mystery, but as a testament to the persistence of those seeking answers. Her family, friends, and supporters refuse to let her memory fade. They continue to call for information, hoping that someone, somewhere, holds the key to what happened on that March evening in 2009. Anyone with knowledge about Nancy Moyer's disappearance is encouraged to contact the Thurston County Sheriff's Office. Until the day that the truth is known, her case remains active, unresolved, and deeply personal for those still waiting. In the hours following Nancy's return home on March 6, 2009, the Tenino neighborhood remained quiet. Around 9:30 p.m., a neighbor reported hearing a car door slam, possibly accompanied by muted voices, but no one saw anything unusual. These faint sounds became a focal point in early police interviews, though without more detail, they led nowhere. Inside Nancy's home, police found a faint impression on the couch beside the wine glass, possibly from someone sitting there that night. However, no fingerprints, DNA, or items were found to confirm a visitor. Investigators also noted the back door was unlocked. There was no sign of forced entry at any point, raising questions about whether Nancy had let someone in voluntarily. Early search efforts were extensive. Law enforcement worked alongside volunteers to cover the wooded terrain surrounding Tenino. Helicopters surveyed from above, and dive teams examined nearby water bodies. Despite their thoroughness, no item belonging to Nancy or sign of foul play was recovered. One peculiar detail stood out. Nancy's cell phone was never found. Records showed it stopped transmitting late that evening, but its physical location remained unknown. Investigators believe the phone might hold critical data or had been deliberately taken to obscure Nancy's movements. Its disappearance reinforced the suspicion that another person was involved. In the days after, Bill Moyer and Nancy's family released public statements appealing for help. They expressed hope, but also confusion. Nancy was described as someone who would never leave her children. Her life was centered around them, and her stable job at the Department of Ecology. The absence of motive only deepened the mystery. Flyers were distributed across Washington. Regional news stations covered her disappearance, and national missing person networks picked up the story. But without leads, each day that passed without Nancy returning diminished hopes. Investigators built a psychological profile of Nancy and studied similar cases, trying to find patterns. Still, the evidence trail ended at her own doorstep. The possibility she had walked into danger willingly, trusting the wrong person, grew increasingly likely. Tenino, a small town with fewer than 2,000 residents, became a place of lingering questions. Porch lights were left on at night in silent vigil, and inside a modest suburban house, a half-full wine glass remained one of the last known signs of Nancy's presence. In the weeks following Nancy Moyer's disappearance, investigators expanded their scope, hoping to build a fuller picture of her relationships and any potential threats. They delved into her social life, which included friendships with colleagues and occasional romantic encounters. Co-workers described Nancy as friendly and outgoing, but private about her personal life. Some friends recalled she had recently mentioned a man she was seeing casually, though his name was not widely known. Detectives began compiling a list of men Nancy may have dated or had contact with in the weeks before March 6th. They interviewed several, collecting alibis and comparing their stories. Most cooperated, and no one stood out as suspicious. Still, detectives noted inconsistencies in minor details, particularly in the accounts of one man who admitted to spending time with Nancy shortly before her disappearance. He was not named publicly, and, with no evidence of wrongdoing, could not be classified as a suspect. Meanwhile, forensic specialists examined Nancy's digital life. Her email accounts, workplace computer, and home devices were analyzed for unusual activity. While nothing overtly suspicious emerged, investigators discovered a few unsent draft emails and deleted messages. They were mostly benign, but one draft hinted at frustration with someone in her personal life. It lacked context and was not dated, limiting its usefulness. In the Tenino area, detectives questioned residents who might have seen anything unusual during the weekend. Nancy vanished. One tip came from a woman living on a nearby road who claimed to have seen a dark-colored sedan parked near Nancy's house around 10 p.m. Friday. She could not identify the make or driver. Investigators tried to correlate this with other reports but found no match. The sheriff's office also consulted the Washington State Patrol and FBI, hoping for specialized assistance or potential links to other missing persons. Nancy's case did not match any known patterns, and the lack of physical evidence made profiling difficult. Her family, growing increasingly desperate, organized additional searches. With help from nonprofit groups, they expanded the search radius. Ground teams covered rural roads, while others canvassed small rivers and abandoned buildings. Items were flagged and collected, but later deemed unrelated. As media coverage increased, law enforcement faced pressure to show progress. Press conferences were held to reassure the public and appeal for help, yet the message remained consistent. The case had no clear leads. The public, moved by Nancy's story, offered dozens of tips, but none proved actionable. Internally, detectives grew more focused. They trimmed their list of persons of interest, narrowing the field to individuals who had both opportunity and proximity. Yet, without probable cause, no arrests or formal accusations could be made. Nancy's case remained a missing person file, not a criminal one, leaving her family and community to wait in frustration and fear. As 2010 arrived with no trace of Nancy Moyer, the investigation quietly shifted from active to cold. While officially still open, the energy surrounding the case waned. Detectives from the Thurston County Sheriff's Office moved on to other assignments, and the rotating roster of investigators meant the continuity of inquiry suffered. Each new detective had to familiarize themselves with an increasingly complex file. Dozens of interviews, timelines, evidence logs, and tips, many of them long since gone stale. Nancy's family refused to let her name fade. They created online profiles on missing person databases and participated in awareness events. Her sisters took on advocacy roles, speaking publicly and pushing for updates. Community vigils were held each year on the anniversary of her disappearance. Photos of Nancy smiling with her daughters were shared again and again, anchoring her memory in the minds of locals and followers online. But as time passed, leads slowed to a trickle. Tips received through hotlines and anonymous messages diminished. By 2012, the Moyer family faced the painful realization that closure might not come soon. The emotional weight of the unknown began taking a toll. In interviews, Bill Moyer admitted the difficulty of raising their daughters without answers, balancing grief with the necessity of moving forward. In law enforcement circles, the Moyer case became a teaching example. It highlighted the challenges of cases without crime scenes, where absence itself is the only evidence. Detectives reviewed the original scene repeatedly, analyzing photographs, rereading transcripts, and revisiting the list of persons of interest. But nothing new emerged. Technology changed over the years. DNA testing advanced. Law enforcement hoped new methods could analyze previously collected materials. But in Nancy's case, there was no weapon, no item with suspicious biological material, no body. These advancements could not produce evidence that didn't exist. In Tenino, Nancy's disappearance became local folklore. Children who had been in elementary school in 2009 were now adults, growing up with stories about the mother who vanished. Some residents believed she had been taken by someone she knew. Others whispered about the darkness that could still linger in their quiet town. Online forums devoted to unsolved mysteries kept the discussion alive. Amateur investigators mapped out Nancy's known schedule, compared her case to others in the Pacific Northwest, and speculated about every known associate. None of these efforts led to concrete revelations, but they helped preserve public interest. The house where Nancy once lived eventually passed to new owners. The wine glass, the TV, the front door left open. They became pieces of a narrative frozen in time. No one had found new answers, but no one had stopped asking either. And in that silence, the Moyer family waited, holding on to the hope that the smallest fact, still hidden, might one day come to light. The 2019 release of Hide and Seek, a true crime podcast focused exclusively on Nancy Moyer's disappearance, marked a turning point in public awareness. Created by journalist James Bays, the podcast approached the case with a fresh set of questions and a methodical narrative. Across multiple episodes, it reassembled the timeline, re-examined known persons of interest, and brought long-forgotten facts back into the public domain. What set the podcast apart was its tone. It didn't dramatize the case, it humanized it. Family members, friends, law enforcement officers, and local residents were interviewed. Their voices added dimension to a case that had long been confined to paper files and fading memories. Nancy was no longer just a missing person. She was a mother, sister, and friend whose absence still echoed in the lives she touched. Hide and Seek also served as a platform for generating new leads. Listeners responded with theories, potential sightings, and recollections from Tenino residents who hadn't spoken to police at the time. Some remembered odd behavior from individuals in the area. Others came forward with previously unshared conversations that took on new significance in hindsight. Among the podcast's episodes was an in-depth look at the initial police response. It highlighted missed opportunities, such as a delayed search of certain wooded areas, and suggested that some early assumptions may have limited the scope of the original investigation. While no accusations were made, it prompted internal discussions at the Thurston County Sheriff's Office about past decisions and the importance of transparency. The show's reach extended beyond Washington. National media picked up the story again, spurred by the podcast's growing popularity. Nancy Moyer's name appeared in news segments, blogs, and true crime forums across the U.S. It led to follow-up interviews with her family and a surge in attention from advocacy organizations that spotlight long-term missing persons. For law enforcement, the podcast served as both a resource and a challenge. On one hand, it provided exposure and new tips. On the other, it brought scrutiny to how the case had been handled. But the renewed attention led to a tangible outcome. In July 2019, Eric Roberts called police and confessed. The timing was no coincidence. He had been listening to the podcast. Though Roberts later retracted his statement, the sequence of events confirmed the podcast's real-world impact. Without it, Roberts might never have come forward at all. While the confession failed to bring closure, it reignited both the investigation and the public's investment in Nancy's fate. Ultimately, Hide and Seek reminded the public and authorities that even in the quietest of cold cases, persistence and exposure can spark movement. Nancy Moyer's case was proof that, even a decade later, stories still matter, and someone might still be listening. Following the confession by Eric Roberts, detectives faced a complex task, determining truth from fabrication. Roberts' call to police had come late at night, after multiple episodes of Hide and Seek had aired. In his statement, he described a sexual encounter with Nancy Moyer that escalated fatally. He claimed he'd strangled her by accident and panicked, disposing of her body. The detail in his account was unsettling. It included references to the interior of his home, items in his living room, and a timeline that aligned roughly with Nancy's last known whereabouts. Detectives, now energized by the possibility of a resolution, secured a search warrant for Robert's Tenino property. Over 2 days, cadaver dogs, forensic specialists, and deputies conducted a methodical search. Soil samples were taken, crawl spaces examined, and the perimeter surveyed for disturbed ground or buried evidence. The cadaver dogs alerted on 2 occasions, one inside the house, one near a shed, but subsequent testing revealed no conclusive traces. Roberts was cooperative but appeared increasingly erratic during follow-up interviews. He gave conflicting statements about the night in question, sometimes saying Nancy had left his home alive, other times saying he didn't remember what happened after she died. Roberts' criminal history was minor. Non-violent misdemeanors, nothing indicating a capacity for homicide. Psychological evaluations were not made public, but investigators noted he was known for eccentric behavior. Some neighbors described him as isolated, with few close contacts. Still, until his 2019 confession, he had never been considered part of the investigation. The lack of physical evidence left prosecutors in a difficult position. Confessions, especially when recanted, require corroboration to be admissible and sufficient for charges. Though his story contained internal consistency, Roberts' backpedaling damaged its credibility. Legal advisors determined there was not enough to arrest him. For Nancy's family, the emotional toll was devastating. The confession had momentarily rekindled hope that the truth would finally surface. When it collapsed, it left behind a deeper frustration. They expressed exhaustion with a system that, while thorough, seemed helpless without a body or forensic evidence. Public reaction mirrored this tension. Some believed Roberts had told the truth and then recoiled from its consequences. Others suspected a manipulative or attention-seeking motive, perhaps driven by guilt or the podcast's spotlight. Forums speculated wildly. Theories range from accidental death to planned harm, while others posited Roberts was covering for someone else. Law enforcement maintained that Roberts remained a person of interest, but unless new evidence emerged, they could not act. The case returned to limbo, more complicated than before, now marked not only by absence, but by a confession that left as many questions as answers. Nancy's daughters, rarely in the public eye, were said to be deeply affected. Their lives had been shadowed by mystery for a decade, and the prospect of resolution slipping away again reopened old wounds. Nestled in the northern part of Mississippi, Panola County is home to the small town of Cortland, a community of fewer than 500 residents where people know each other by name, and neighbors often double as extended family. It's the kind of place where quiet roads wind through pine forests, and change comes slowly. But on December 6, 2014, this quiet town was upended by an act of violence that made national headlines and left a lasting scar on the heart of the community. Jessica Lane Chambers was born on February 2, 1995, to Ben and Lisa Chambers. Described by those close to her as bubbly, caring, and fiercely loyal, Jessica, known as Jessie to her friends, was a former cheerleader with bright blue eyes and long blonde hair. She had graduated from South Panola High School and had dreams of becoming a nurse. Though her life, like that of many young people, had taken a few difficult turns, including struggles with school and friendships, Jessica remained close to her family, particularly her mother, Lisa, and her father, Ben, who worked with the local fire department. Jessica lived with her mother in Cortland, though she often visited her father in nearby Batesville. She was known to frequent a group of friends in the area and had recently begun branching out to new social circles. Friends and family later described her as someone in transition, attempting to reclaim control over her life, distancing herself from previous influences, and considering enrollment in college. On the morning of December 6th, Jessica woke up in Cortland. That day was relatively uneventful according to her family. Surveillance footage from the day shows her dressed in a long-sleeve yellow shirt and pajama pants, casual wear that indicated a normal, relaxed Saturday. At around 5:30 p.m., she stopped by a gas station, the M&M First Stop on Highway 51, where she purchased gasoline and chatted briefly with store clerk Ali Fadl, an Iraqi immigrant who had known her for several months. Video surveillance captured her at the pump, then walking back to her car, a 2005 Kia Rio. This was the last clear image of Jessica before tragedy struck. As darkness fell, residents of Cortland were preparing for another calm December night. Instead, what came was a fire, bright, fast, and violent, that would bring first responders to Heron Road and shake the foundations of the community. A call came in to 911 at 8:10 p.m., reporting a car on fire. When firefighters arrived minutes later, what they found would change the trajectory of the investigation, the community, and the lives of Jessica's loved ones forever. The afternoon of December 6, 2014, unfolded with an unassuming rhythm. Jessica Chambers' movements were pieced together after her death through surveillance footage, cell phone data, and witness testimonies, forming a timeline critical to the investigation. Around 11:30 a.m., Jessica visited her mother, Lisa Dougherty, at home in Cortland. Lisa later recalled that Jessica was in good spirits, casually dressed, and appeared relaxed. Sometime that afternoon, Jessica used her phone to communicate with several individuals, texts and calls that would later be scrutinized by investigators. By 5:30 p.m., she was seen at the M&M First Stop gas station, where surveillance footage showed her interacting with Ali Fadl. She was observed pumping gasoline and talking with Fadl for a few minutes before driving away. The gas station, located near the highway, was a frequent stop for locals. Jessica had visited it often. The clerk later said Jessica seemed normal, nothing out of the ordinary. The footage showed no signs of distress. After leaving the station, she reportedly made contact with a few friends. One individual she communicated with was Quentin Tellis, a man she had met only a few weeks earlier. Tellis, a local resident with a history of criminal activity, had recently returned to Mississippi from Louisiana. Cell phone records indicated that he and Jessica had exchanged a flurry of messages that day. Investigators would later use tower data to track the locations of their phones, revealing overlapping routes in and around Cortland between 5:30 and 7:30 p.m. Around 6:30 p.m., both phones appeared to travel together out toward a remote area near Heron Road. By 7:30 p.m., Jessica's phone had stopped moving. Cell tower data placed it within a half-mile of where her burning car would be found. Witnesses later recalled seeing a small, light-colored vehicle driving erratically near that area during the same time frame. At 8:10 p.m., a call was made to 911 reporting a car fire. When responders from the Cortland Volunteer Fire Department arrived at the scene off Heron Road, they discovered the Kia Rio fully engulfed in flames. What they hadn't expected was the sight of a young woman staggering from the woods, severely burned and barely able to speak. Jessica had burns covering over 90% of her body. She was naked except for a small piece of clothing melted to her skin. Paramedics later said she was trying to speak, and one firefighter, Cole Haley, reported that when asked who had done this to her, Jessica appeared to utter a name that sounded like Eric or Derek. This would become one of the most scrutinized details of the case. She was flown to the Regional Medical Center in Memphis, Tennessee, where she succumbed to her injuries the next morning. Her last hours would become central to one of the most perplexing murder cases in recent Mississippi history. The emergency call came in at 8:10 p.m. on December 6, 2014. A local resident had reported a vehicle on fire off Heron Road, a rural strip lined with trees and gravel not far from the center of Cortland. Within minutes, volunteer firefighters from the Cortland Fire Department were dispatched to the scene. They arrived to find a Kia Rio completely ablaze, the flames lighting up the surrounding brush in orange and white. Among the first on the scene was Cole Haley, a local firefighter and acquaintance of Jessica Chambers' father. As he approached the burning car, something unimaginable happened. A figure emerged from the shadows. Jessica Chambers was alive, barely. Her body was nearly unrecognizable. 93% of her skin had been burned. Her hair was singed, her clothing virtually gone. She was covered in soot, and her skin was peeling. Haley would later say the sight of her haunted him. She looked like a zombie. Despite her condition, Jessica was trying to speak. According to testimony from multiple first responders, she repeated something that sounded like Eric, Derek, or similar variations. This led firefighters and emergency medical personnel to report that she was attempting to name her attacker. However, due to the severity of her injuries, including damage to her mouth and throat, others questioned whether she was capable of clearly articulating words. Paramedics asked her who had done this. She reportedly tried to respond, but her speech was slurred and faint. The car, already charred, was still smoldering as firefighters extinguished the remaining flames. The vehicle was quickly secured for evidence. Investigators found that an accelerant, believed to be gasoline, had been poured on and inside the car, as well as on Jessica's body. Traces of accelerant were later confirmed by lab analysis, suggesting a deliberate attempt to destroy both her and any physical evidence. Crime scene photos captured the severity of the fire. The interior of the Kia was nearly completely destroyed. Few personal items remained identifiable. Investigators combed through the scene for clues, but the intense heat had compromised many potential leads. Jessica was rushed to the Regional Medical Center in Memphis, a trauma facility known for treating severe burn victims. There, doctors assessed the extent of her injuries. Over 90% of her body surface was burned, and her internal airways had sustained significant damage. She was able to provide only limited verbal responses before slipping into unconsciousness. She was pronounced dead the following morning, on December 7, 2014. Her death certificate listed the cause as thermal injuries. The autopsy later revealed soot in her lungs, indicating she had been alive and breathing as the fire consumed her. The brutality of the attack shocked even seasoned investigators. They now face the challenge of reconstructing the events of that night and identifying who had committed the act. Word of Jessica's death spread quickly through Panola County and beyond. Local law enforcement, assisted by the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation and federal agencies, initiated a multi-agency task force. The community, devastated, lit candles in her memory. For many in Cortland, the crime was more than tragic. It felt personal. The aftermath of Jessica Chambers' death launched a complex and exhaustive investigation involving local, state, and federal authorities. The Panola County Sheriff's Office, Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, MBI, and later the FBI collaborated to piece together the timeline, identify suspects, and pursue justice in one of the most brutal homicides the state had seen in years. Investigators began by interviewing first responders, including Cole Haley and EMTs who had tried to communicate with Jessica at the scene. Their recollection, that she uttered the name Eric or something similar, formed the initial basis for suspect identification. In the days that followed, authorities reviewed every Eric or Derek known to have interacted with Jessica. More than a dozen individuals with those or similar names were questioned and investigated. None were charged. The crime scene was methodically examined. Forensic teams recovered remnants of a gas can nozzle, pieces of fabric, melted phone components, and debris from the charred vehicle. Traces of a flammable accelerant were confirmed by lab tests. Investigators theorized that the accelerant had been poured over and inside the vehicle, then ignited, likely with the intent of silencing Jessica and eliminating evidence. Jessica's cell phone, though damaged in the fire, was sent to FBI labs. Digital forensics experts managed to retrieve call logs, texts, and geolocation data. The phone's final movements traced her path around Cortland that day, aligning with surveillance footage and witness accounts. Authorities cross-referenced this data with phone records from individuals she had contacted, focusing on those whose devices had traveled similar paths. The M&M gas station surveillance footage became pivotal. It showed Jessica around 5:30 p.m., wearing her distinctive pajama pants and a yellow top, interacting calmly with the clerk and then leaving. Behind the scenes, investigators scrutinized every second of footage, searching for suspicious activity or persons near her vehicle. The recovered phone data led authorities to one name that would remain central to the case: Quentin Tellis. A native of Cortland, Tellis had recently returned from Monroe, Louisiana, where he had lived intermittently. He had a prior criminal history involving burglary and drug-related offenses. Investigators found that his phone had traveled alongside Jessica's that day and was located in the same cell tower area as hers around the time of the fire. Despite this, no physical evidence directly linked Tellis to the murder scene. There were no fingerprints, DNA, or eyewitness accounts placing him at the site of the fire. Moreover, the name Jessica allegedly spoke, Eric or Derek, did not match Tellis. This incongruity raised questions within the investigative team and among the public. Still, authorities pursued Tellis. He was interviewed multiple times over the following months. His statements to police shifted. At first, he denied seeing Jessica the day she died. Later, he admitted they had ridden together, but claimed he was not with her near the time of the fire. These inconsistencies became critical in building the prosecution's theory. The case remained open, but without formal charges for over a year. During that time, Jessica's family made public pleas for justice. The community held vigils and fundraisers, while local law enforcement continued following leads. It wasn't until February 2016, more than a year after the murder, that Quentin Tellis was indicted for the capital murder of Jessica Chambers. The indictment of Quentin Verdell Tellis in February 2016 marked a turning point in the Jessica Chambers investigation. After over a year of public speculation, the announcement was made at a press conference led by District Attorney John Champion and Panola County Sheriff Dennis Darby. Tellis was charged with capital murder, accused of intentionally setting Jessica on fire and causing her death. Tellis had emerged as a central figure due to multiple investigative threads. Most significantly, cell phone data placed both his and Jessica's phones in the same vicinity throughout the day of her death, including near Heron Road, where her burning car was found. The records showed that the two had communicated dozens of times in the days leading up to December 6th, and that they exchanged several messages on the day she died. Tellis initially denied any involvement. During his first interviews with law enforcement in December 2014, he claimed he hadn't seen Jessica on the day she died. However, as investigators confronted him with location data and phone records, his account changed. In subsequent statements, he admitted to being with Jessica earlier that day and said they had driven around together. He claimed they parted ways hours before the fire. Despite his shifting story, the evidence against Tellis was circumstantial. There were no eyewitnesses placing him at the scene, and DNA evidence from the car and Jessica's body did not conclusively match him. However, the timeline built through digital data pointed to Tellis being in close proximity to Jessica in the critical hours before her death. Tellis had also deleted texts between himself and Jessica after the murder. Investigators recovered some of these messages, including one sent around 7:42 p.m. asking her where she was, a detail that contradicted his claim of having not seen her since earlier that day. In the eyes of prosecutors, this deletion suggested consciousness of guilt. Additionally, Tellis was known to law enforcement. He had prior felony convictions and had been arrested several times for burglary and drug-related offenses. At the time of his indictment in the Chambers case, he was already in custody in Louisiana on unrelated charges involving the use of a stolen debit card belonging to Maying Chen Xiao, a woman who had been found murdered in Monroe, Louisiana in August 2015. Authorities in Mississippi and Louisiana coordinated efforts. While Tellis was held in Louisiana for charges related to Xiao's death, Mississippi filed for his extradition to stand trial for Jessica's murder. In June 2016, he was returned to Panola County, where he pleaded not guilty. The indictment relied heavily on the digital timeline and Tellis's evolving story. Prosecutors contended that he was the last person known to be with Jessica, and that his behavior, deleting texts, lying to police, demonstrated guilt. Defense attorneys, however, would argue that there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime and that the prosecution's case rested on assumptions. In anticipation of trial, both sides prepared for a courtroom battle that would hinge on forensics, cell data, and the credibility of Tellis's statements. Jessica's family, having waited years for answers, hoped justice would soon be served. But the legal proceedings that followed would prove anything but straightforward. In October 2017, nearly 3 years after Jessica Chambers' death, Quentin Tellis stood trial for capital murder in Batesville, Mississippi. The proceedings, held in Panola County Circuit Court, attracted national media coverage. For Jessica's family, the trial marked a long-awaited step toward accountability. For the prosecution and defense, it was a battle over narrative, one built on digital evidence, statements, and unanswered questions. District Attorney John Champion led the prosecution, outlining the state's case in opening arguments that Quentin Tellis had deliberately set Jessica Chambers on fire after luring her to a remote area, fearing exposure or conflict over their relationship. Prosecutors argued that Tellis's changing accounts to law enforcement, deletion of texts, and presence near the crime scene tied him to the murder. They emphasized phone records and cell tower data, showing both Jessica's and Tellis's phones traveling in tandem that evening, concluding with Tellis's device moving away from the scene just minutes before the fire was reported. The state called more than 35 witnesses, including first responders who testified about Jessica's condition. Key among them was Cole Haley, who emotionally described Jessica's attempts to speak, reportedly naming Eric or Derek when asked who hurt her. Firefighters and EMTs presented consistent accounts, supporting this initial response. Prosecutors acknowledged this discrepancy, but suggested Jessica may have been disoriented or unable to speak clearly due to her injuries. Expert witnesses for the prosecution included digital forensic analysts who reconstructed Jessica's and Tellis's phone locations using tower pings and GPS data. Their analysis indicated that both phones were at or near the murder site at the critical time. They also noted gaps in Tellis's location data, which they argued were deliberate, suggesting he may have turned off his phone to avoid tracking. The defense, led by attorney Darla Palmer, countered that the entire case was circumstantial. They argued that no physical evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints, linked Tellis to the crime. The defense emphasized the lack of a murder weapon, absence of motive, and the uncertainty surrounding Jessica's final words. Palmer argued that Jessica's repeated statements at the scene pointed to someone named Eric, and that law enforcement ignored this lead to focus on Tellis. Tellis did not testify, but the jury heard his recorded interviews with investigators. In them, Tellis first denied and later admitted seeing Jessica the day she died. The defense painted this inconsistency as the result of pressure from interrogators, not guilt. They also questioned the accuracy of cell tower mapping, suggesting it was not precise enough to conclusively place Tellis at the scene. After more than a week of testimony, the jury began deliberations. The case proved polarizing. Some jurors were persuaded by the circumstantial timeline and Tellis's actions. Others remained uncertain, clinging to the lack of direct evidence and Jessica's reported final words. On October 16, 2017, after several days of deliberation, the judge declared a mistrial. The jury had been unable to reach a unanimous verdict. The deadlock reflected the complexity of the case, a mix of forensic science, human error, and doubt. The mistrial was a blow to Jessica's family, but prosecutors quickly announced plans to retry Tellis. The first trial had exposed both the strengths and weaknesses of the case, setting the stage for a second attempt to resolve one of Mississippi's most haunting crimes. A year after the first trial ended in mistrial, prosecutors prepared once again to try Quentin Tellis for the murder of Jessica Chambers. In September 2018, the retrial was relocated to Pike County, Mississippi, to ensure an impartial jury, given the extensive local media coverage the case had generated in Panola County. As with the first trial, both sides would rely heavily on digital evidence and the interpretation of Jessica's final words. Opening statements in the retrial echoed those of 2017. District Attorney John Champion maintained that Quentin Tellis was the only person whose actions aligned with the crime timeline. Prosecutors contended that Tellis and Jessica spent the afternoon together on December 6, 2014, and that their phones traveled together to the location where Jessica's burning car was later discovered. They asserted that Tellis set her on fire after an argument or failed sexual advance, citing phone data and the deletion of messages as circumstantial proof of guilt. The prosecution again presented testimony from first responders, including Cole Haley and EMTs, who recounted Jessica's reported attempts to name her attacker. Most heard a name sounding like Eric or Derek. One paramedic, Josh Perkins, testified that she said Eric did this, reinforcing a key point of contention. Prosecutors argued that Jessica, severely burned and in shock, may have been unable to articulate properly, or that Eric was a misunderstanding of another name. New witnesses and evidence were introduced. A linguistics expert was brought in to suggest that Jessica's damaged vocal cords and burned tongue could have altered the way her words sounded. The prosecution also highlighted additional digital data showing Tellis's phone abruptly went dark, losing location signals for approximately an hour during the window of the crime, which they interpreted as a deliberate effort to conceal his whereabouts. Defense attorney Darla Palmer continued to challenge the foundation of the state's case. She emphasized that no physical evidence tied Tellis to the murder scene or the accelerant used. Palmer argued that law enforcement had prematurely fixated on Tellis and ignored other potential suspects, especially in light of Jessica's statements implicating someone else. The defense again focused on the final utterances of Jessica Chambers. Multiple firefighters and medical staff recalled her identifying her attacker by name, and none said she mentioned Tellis. Palmer also pointed out that Tellis was not known to go by Eric and questioned the reliability of the cell tower evidence, noting its limited precision in rural areas. After another week of detailed and emotional testimony, the jury was tasked with deliberation. Despite extensive review, they too failed to reach a unanimous verdict. On October 1st, 2018, the judge declared a second mistrial. Like the first, this result reflected deep divisions among jurors, with some persuaded by the circumstantial evidence, while others remained unconvinced due to the lack of direct proof and ambiguity of Jessica's final words. Following the second mistrial, the Mississippi Attorney General's office announced it would not pursue a third trial unless new evidence emerged. Tellis remained in custody in Louisiana, where he faced separate charges in an unrelated homicide case. The decision not to retry the case left Jessica's family devastated, still without legal closure. The dual mistrials highlighted the limitations of forensic and digital evidence in the absence of physical proof or a clear motive. Despite 2 full trials and years of investigation, the question of who killed Jessica Chambers remained unresolved in the eyes of the court. While legal proceedings in Mississippi slowed following the second mistrial, developments in another state added complexity to the Jessica Chambers case. Quentin Tellis, already a suspect in Panola County, was simultaneously facing serious legal trouble in Louisiana related to the death of Maying Chen Xiao, a 34-year-old Taiwanese graduate student found murdered in Monroe in August 2015. Xiao, known as Mandy to friends, was studying at the University of Louisiana at Monroe. On August 8, 2015, her body was discovered in her apartment, having been stabbed more than 30 times. Her debit card was missing, and investigators found evidence that it had been used in multiple ATM withdrawals following her death. Security footage from one ATM showed a man wearing a hood using her card, later identified as Quentin Tellis. Tellis initially told police he had minimal contact with Xiao. However, investigators found that he had visited her apartment multiple times in the days before her death. Phone records and surveillance footage placed him near her apartment around the time of the murder. Most damningly, he used her bank card at several locations and was seen on video with it in hand. In November 2015, Tellis was arrested in Monroe and charged with unauthorized use of Xiao's debit card. While in custody, Louisiana authorities developed a murder case against him. In May 2016, a grand jury indicted him for second-degree murder. Prosecutors claimed Tellis tortured Xiao to extract her PIN number and then killed her to prevent identification. The case introduced new scrutiny into Tellis's background. He had previous convictions, including burglary and drug charges. Authorities painted a picture of a man with a history of manipulation, deceit, and violence. However, as in the Chambers case, the Louisiana evidence was largely circumstantial. No DNA or eyewitness tied him directly to the act of killing Xiao. Despite this, Louisiana prosecutors pursued Tellis aggressively. He remained jailed there, and Mississippi authorities coordinated with their Louisiana counterparts to ensure that if he were acquitted in one case, he would face trial in the other. The cross-state coordination reflected the seriousness with which both states regarded the allegations against him. For the Chambers investigation, the Xiao case served multiple functions. It provided a possible motive pattern, suggesting Tellis acted violently when cornered or caught. Prosecutors in Mississippi subtly referred to his Louisiana charges during the trials, though they were careful to limit prejudicial impact. However, the existence of two separate murder indictments also complicated perceptions of guilt. Critics argued that prosecutors in two states were attempting to secure convictions based on different circumstantial theories, neither of which included physical evidence. Defense attorneys suggested the Louisiana case reinforced the notion that Tellis had become a convenient suspect in two unresolved murders without definitive proof. By 2019, Tellis remained incarcerated in Louisiana, awaiting trial in the Xiao case. Legal delays, including disputes over forensic evidence and witness availability, slowed proceedings. Meanwhile, Mississippi prosecutors had paused efforts for a third trial in Jessica's case, stating they would await the outcome in Louisiana before making further decisions. The overlap between the two cases fueled media attention and public debate. For some, it reinforced suspicions about Tellis. For others, it underscored systemic challenges in prosecuting complex, circumstantial murder cases. As legal battles continued across state lines, one fact remained clear. Jessica Chambers' death was still legally unresolved, and her family's quest for justice remained painfully incomplete. Years after Jessica Chambers' death, the search for justice remains unfinished. Despite 2 trials and a prime suspect, no one has been legally convicted for her murder. Quentin Tellis, the man twice tried for her killing, has never been found guilty in connection to the case. The repeated mistrials left prosecutors without a clear path forward, and the case entered a period of legal limbo. Following the 2018 mistrial, the Mississippi Attorney General's office stated that it would not attempt a third prosecution unless new, compelling evidence emerged. With no physical evidence tying Tellis directly to the crime and Jessica's final words continuing to fuel reasonable doubt, the state lacked the certainty needed for a successful retrial. Panola County officials reiterated their commitment to keeping the case open, but no additional suspects have been publicly named. Meanwhile, Tellis remains in custody in Louisiana, where he awaits trial for the 2015 murder of Maying Chen Xiao. Legal delays, including the COVID-19 pandemic and evidentiary disputes, have prolonged proceedings in that case. As of early 2025, no trial date has been finalized, and Tellis remains incarcerated on charges unrelated to Jessica's death. Jessica's family, particularly her mother, Lisa Doherty, has continued to speak out. Lisa has participated in interviews, documentary features, and public memorials to keep her daughter's memory alive and draw attention to the unresolved nature of the case. Jessica didn't deserve what happened to her, she has said repeatedly. We need answers. Cortland, the small Mississippi town where Jessica lived and died, also continues to feel the impact. Annual vigils are held in her memory, and residents remember the night of December 6, 2014, as a turning point, when safety and trust were suddenly questioned. The crime drew national media coverage and inspired multiple documentary projects, including an in-depth series by Oxygen Network and significant coverage by Court TV and local outlets. The case also triggered discussions about the use and limits of forensic technology in criminal investigations. Key evidence in the Chambers case, such as cell phone tower data and location mapping, played a central role, but also exposed the challenges of relying on digital footprints without corroborating physical proof. The difficulty of interpreting Jessica's final words, spoken through extreme trauma, highlighted the limits of eyewitness testimony and the importance of clear medical assessments in forensic contexts. As of now, the investigation remains technically active. Law enforcement agencies maintain that they are open to new tips and evidence. In public statements, officials have said that they periodically review the case file, yet no major breakthroughs have been reported since the second mistrial. Jessica Chambers' legacy continues in her community and in the broader conversation about justice in complex criminal cases. Her story has become emblematic of a legal system's struggle to convict when evidence is incomplete and reasonable doubt persists. While many still believe they know who killed Jessica, the burden of proof required by law remains unmet. In the end, the Jessica Chambers case stands as a reminder of the fragility of justice, the resilience of a grieving family, and a community still searching for answers more than a decade after tragedy struck a quiet Mississippi town. Brittany Ann Murphy was born on November 10, 1977, in Atlanta, Georgia, to Sharon Kathleen Murphy and Angelo Joseph Bertolotti. Her parents divorced when she was 2 years old, and she was raised by her mother in Edison, New Jersey. From a young age, Murphy exhibited a passion for the performing arts, studying singing, dancing, and acting. At 9, she performed in a production of Les Miserables, and by 13, she had secured a manager to help guide her burgeoning career. In 1991, Murphy and her mother relocated to Los Angeles to further her acting ambitions. She quickly found work in television, landing her first significant role as Brenda Drexel in the sitcom Drexel's Class, 1991-1992. Throughout the early 1990s, she appeared in various television series, including Blossom, Frasier, and Murder One. Her versatility and talent allowed her to transition seamlessly between comedic and dramatic roles. Murphy's breakthrough came in 1995 when she was cast as Ty Frasier in the teen comedy Clueless. The film was a commercial success and has since become a cult classic. Her portrayal of the awkward new girl, transformed by the popular clique, showcased her comedic timing and endearing screen presence. Following Clueless, Murphy continued to build her filmography with roles in Freeway, 1996, Bongwater, 1998, and Girl, Interrupted, 1999, where she played Daisy Randone, a troubled psychiatric patient. Her performance in Girl Interrupted was noted for its depth and intensity, further establishing her as a serious actress. In addition to her film work, Murphy lent her voice to the animated television series King of the Hill, voicing the character Luann Platter from 1997 until her death in 2009. Her work on the show earned her critical acclaim and demonstrated her adaptability as a performer. By the early 2000s, Murphy had solidified her status in Hollywood with roles in Don't Say a Word, 2001, 8 Mile, 2002, and Uptown Girls, 2003. Her performances were marked by a blend of vulnerability and strength, capturing audiences and critics alike. Murphy's rise in Hollywood was characterized by a series of diverse roles that showcased her range and dedication to her craft. Her early career laid the foundation for what many anticipated would be a long and successful tenure in the entertainment industry. In the early 2000s, Brittany Murphy's career was on an upward trajectory, with standout performances in films like 8 Mile, 2002, and Uptown Girls, 2003. She had established herself as a versatile actress. However, alongside her professional success, Murphy faced increasing scrutiny over her physical appearance, particularly her weight. Reports from colleagues and friends indicate that Murphy was under significant pressure to conform to Hollywood's beauty standards. Actress Melanie Lynskey, a close friend, recalled Murphy's struggles with self-image, stating that people tried to cast her as the fat one due to her naturally round cheeks during her teenage years. This perception led Murphy to make drastic changes to her appearance, including significant weight loss and altering her hair color. Murphy addressed the rumors about her weight loss in various interviews. In a 2005 interview with Jane magazine, she firmly denied using cocaine, stating, "No, just for the record, I have never tried it in my entire life." She attributed her weight loss to natural changes and a healthy lifestyle. Despite her denials, the media continued to speculate about potential eating disorders and substance abuse. The pressure to maintain a certain image took a toll on Murphy's mental and physical health. Friends noted her increasing self-consciousness, with one stating, "She had insane self-image issues. She didn't want to be the fat girl from Clueless." Murphy's transformation was not just physical. It also affected her confidence and interactions within the industry. As the media's focus on her appearance intensified, Murphy's career began to face challenges. Roles became scarce, and she was often typecast based on her looks rather than her talent. The combination of industry pressures and personal struggles marked a turning point in Murphy's life, setting the stage for the difficulties she would face in the years leading up to her untimely death. In 2006, Brittany Murphy met British screenwriter Simon Monjack during the stalled production of The White Hotel. Despite the film's failure to materialize, their relationship progressed rapidly. By May 2007, they married in a private Jewish ceremony in Los Angeles, surprising friends and family who were unaware of their engagement. Monjak's past was fraught with legal and financial troubles. He had faced lawsuits totaling over $500,000 and had been evicted from multiple residences. In 2005, Virginia authorities issued warrants for his arrest on credit card fraud and theft allegations, though charges were not pursued. Additionally, in 2007, he spent 9 days in jail due to an expired visa, leading to speculation that his marriage to Murphy was a means to avoid deportation. Concerns about Monjak's influence on Murphy grew among her friends and colleagues. Actress Kathy Najimy recalled warning Murphy about the hasty marriage, stating, "Honey, it hasn't been enough." Murphy's friend Lisa Refill noted that after the marriage, Murphy became increasingly isolated, with Monjak controlling her communications and professional decisions. He reportedly fired her entire team and took over roles such as her manager and makeup artist. Monjak's history of deceit extended beyond his relationship with Murphy. His ex-fiancée, Elizabeth Ragsdale, revealed that he had fabricated a story about having spinal cancer and needing shark cartilage treatments. He abandoned her while she was pregnant, and upon contacting his mother, she discovered the illness was a fabrication. Despite these red flags, Murphy remained devoted to Monjak. They lived together with her mother, Sharon, in a Hollywood Hills mansion. However, the combination of Monjak's controlling behavior and Murphy's declining health raised alarms among those close to her. Her final film, Something Wicked, was marred by Monjak's interference, with reports of him taking over her hair and makeup on set, leading to concerns among the crew. The marriage between Brittany Murphy and Simon Monjak was characterized by secrecy, control, and growing unease among those who knew them. As Murphy's health deteriorated and her isolation deepened, questions about Monjak's role in her life and career became increasingly pressing. In 2006, Brittany Murphy met British screenwriter Simon Monjak during the stalled production of The White Hotel. Despite the film's failure to materialize, their relationship progressed rapidly. By May 2007, they married in a private Jewish ceremony in Los Angeles, surprising friends and family who were unaware of their engagement. Monjak's past was fraught with legal and financial troubles. He had faced lawsuits totaling over $500,000 and had been evicted from multiple residences. In 2005, Virginia authorities issued warrants for his arrest on credit card fraud and theft allegations, though charges were not pursued. Additionally, in 2007, he spent 9 days in jail due to an expired visa, leading to speculation that his marriage to Murphy was a means to avoid deportation. Concerns about Monjak's influence on Murphy grew among her friends and colleagues. Actress Kathy Najimy recalled warning Murphy about the hasty marriage, stating, "Honey, it hasn't been enough." Murphy's friend Lisa Refill noted that after the marriage, Murphy became increasingly isolated, with Monjak controlling her communications and professional decisions. He reportedly fired her entire team and took over roles such as her manager and makeup artist. Monjak's history of deceit extended beyond his relationship with Murphy. His ex-fiancée, Elizabeth Ragsdale, revealed that he had fabricated a story about having spinal cancer and needing shark cartilage treatments. He abandoned her while she was pregnant, and upon contacting his mother, she discovered the illness was a fabrication. Despite these red flags, Murphy remained devoted to Monjak. They lived together with her mother, Sharon, in a Hollywood Hills mansion. However, the combination of Monjack's controlling behavior and Murphy's declining health raised alarms among those close to her. Her final film, Something Wicked, was marred by Monjack's interference, with reports of him taking over her hair and makeup on set, leading to concerns among the crew. The marriage between Brittany Murphy and Simon Monjack was characterized by secrecy, control, and growing unease among those who knew them. As Murphy's health deteriorated and her isolation deepened, questions about Monjack's role in her life and career became increasingly pressing. In the summer of 2009, Brittany Murphy was filming Something Wicked in Eugene, Oregon. Co-stars and crew members noted her frail appearance and low energy. Actress Katie O'Grady described Murphy as frail and going through a hard time, while makeup artist Trista Jordan recalled her as having sunken eyes and being in visible pain. Murphy's husband, Simon Monjack, was a constant presence on set, often isolating her from others. He took over roles such as her hair and makeup, leading to concerns among the crew about his controlling behavior. In the months leading up to her death, Murphy's health declined. She suffered from flu-like symptoms, anemia, and pneumonia. Despite her condition, she did not seek medical attention. On December 20th, 2009, Murphy collapsed in her bathroom. Emergency services were called, and she was transported to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where she was pronounced dead at 10:05 a.m. An autopsy revealed that Murphy died from pneumonia, with contributing factors of iron deficiency anemia and multiple drug intoxication. The medications found in her system were consistent with treatment for a cold or respiratory infection. Murphy's death shocked the entertainment industry and her fans. Her final days were marked by declining health, isolation, and a lack of medical intervention. On December 21st, 2009, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office performed an autopsy on Brittany Murphy, following her sudden death at age 32. The initial findings, released in February 2010, identified the primary cause of death as community-acquired pneumonia, with contributing factors of iron deficiency anemia and multiple drug intoxication. The manner of death was ruled accidental. The autopsy report detailed that Murphy had been suffering from severe anemia, with a hemoglobin level of 3.0 GDL, significantly below the normal range of 12 to 15.5 GDL for women. This level of anemia would have left her body extremely vulnerable to infection. Dr. Lisa Sheinin, the deputy medical examiner who conducted the autopsy, stated that such a low hemoglobin count was incompatible with life, and that immediate medical intervention, such as blood transfusions, could have potentially saved her. Toxicology tests revealed the presence of several over-the-counter and prescription medications in Murphy's system, including hydrocodone, acetaminophen, L-methamphetamine, and chlorpheniramine. These substances are commonly found in medications used to treat colds and respiratory infections. No illegal drugs or alcohol were detected. Despite the official findings, Murphy's father, Angelo Bertolotti, questioned the conclusions of the autopsy. In 2013, he commissioned an independent toxicology report, which claimed to have found elevated levels of heavy metals in Murphy's hair samples, suggesting possible poisoning. However, experts, including toxicologist Bruce Goldberger, cautioned that hair analysis alone is insufficient to determine poisoning and that other clinical signs were absent. The circumstances surrounding Murphy's death, combined with the subsequent death of her husband, Simon Monjack, from similar causes 5 months later, fueled ongoing speculation and conspiracy theories. Nevertheless, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office has maintained that Murphy's death was due to natural causes exacerbated by her weakened state and the effects of multiple medications. On May 23, 2010, just 5 months after Brittany Murphy's death, her husband, Simon Monjack, was found dead in their Hollywood Hills home. Sharon Murphy, Brittany's mother, discovered Monjack unconscious in the master bedroom around 9:20 p.m. and called emergency services. Paramedics arrived promptly, but Monjack was pronounced dead at 9:45 p.m. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office conducted an autopsy, revealing that Monjack died from acute pneumonia and severe anemia, the same causes attributed to Murphy's death. No illegal drugs were found in his system, and the death was ruled as natural. The striking similarity between their causes of death led to public speculation about potential environmental factors in their home. Reports suggested that toxic mold might have contributed to their illnesses. However, the coroner dismissed these claims, stating that mold was not a factor in either death. Monjack was buried next to Murphy at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills. Their consecutive deaths under similar circumstances remain a subject of public intrigue and speculation. Brittany Murphy and Simon Monjack resided in a Mediterranean-style mansion located on Rising Glen Road in the Hollywood Hills. Murphy purchased the property in 2003 from pop star Britney Spears for $3.85 million. The house, perched atop the Sunset Strip, boasted panoramic views of Los Angeles. Following the sudden deaths of both Murphy and Monjack within a span of 5 months, speculation arose regarding potential environmental factors within the home. Reports suggested that toxic mold might have contributed to their illnesses. However, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office dismissed these claims, stating that mold was not a factor in either death. Despite the official findings, Murphy's mother, Sharon Murphy, later changed her stance. In December 2011, she filed a lawsuit against the attorneys who represented her in a previous case concerning the home's construction defects. Sharon alleged that the attorneys failed to advise her about the possibility of filing a wrongful death suit related to toxic mold exposure. The house itself underwent significant changes in the years following the couple's deaths. After struggling to find a buyer, Sharon sold the property in 2011 at a substantial loss. The new owners demolished the original structure and rebuilt a contemporary mansion on the site. By 2017, the revamped property was sold for $14.53 million, bearing no resemblance to its former incarnation. The Rising Glen Road residence remains a focal point in the narrative surrounding Brittany Murphy and Simon Monjack's untimely deaths. While official reports attribute their passing to natural causes, the home's history continues to evoke intrigue and speculation. In the aftermath of Brittany Murphy's untimely death, her family became embroiled in a public dispute over the circumstances surrounding her passing. Angelo Bertolotti, Murphy's father, openly challenged the official cause of death, asserting that his daughter had been poisoned. He commissioned an independent toxicology report, which indicated elevated levels of heavy metals in Murphy's hair samples. Bertolotti interpreted these findings as evidence of deliberate poisoning, suggesting that a third party was involved in his daughter's death. Sharon Murphy, Brittany's mother, vehemently refuted Bertolotti's claims. In an open letter published by The Hollywood Reporter, she described his allegations as madness and accused him of attempting to exploit their daughter's death for personal gain. Sharon emphasized that Bertolotti had been absent from Brittany's life and was now spreading unfounded theories that tarnished her memory. The conflicting narratives between Murphy's parents fueled media speculation and public intrigue. Bertolotti's assertions extended beyond poisoning. He implied that Murphy's support for a whistleblower against the Department of Homeland Security might have made her a target, leading to her alleged murder. These claims, however, lacked substantive evidence and were dismissed by experts and authorities. Sharon Murphy, seeking to protect her daughter's legacy, maintained that Brittany's death was a tragic result of pneumonia and anemia compounded by prescription drug use. She criticized Bertolotti's actions as attempts to profit from sensationalism and reiterated that the official autopsy findings were conclusive. The legal and familial discord following Brittany Murphy's death highlighted the complexities of grief and the challenges of navigating public scrutiny. The divergent perspectives of her parents underscored the enduring impact of her loss and the struggle to find closure amidst controversy. In the wake of Brittany Murphy's untimely death in December 2009, the media landscape became saturated with speculation, theories, and sensational headlines. Despite the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office ruling her death as accidental, caused by pneumonia with contributing factors of iron deficiency anemia and multiple drug intoxication, public discourse veered into conjecture. One of the most persistent theories centered around the possibility of poisoning. Angelo Bertolotti, Murphy's father, commissioned an independent toxicology report in 2013, which purportedly found elevated levels of heavy metals in her hair samples. Bertolotti suggested that these findings indicated deliberate poisoning. However, experts, including those from the World Health Organization, cautioned that hair analysis alone is insufficient to determine poisoning, as external contamination can affect results. The Los Angeles Coroner's Office maintained that more conclusive evidence would be necessary to reopen the investigation. The media's role in amplifying these theories cannot be understated. Tabloids and online platforms speculated wildly, with some even linking Murphy's death to government conspiracies due to her alleged support of a whistleblower against the Department of Homeland Security. These claims, however, lack substantive evidence and were largely dismissed by authorities and experts. Documentaries such as HBO Max's What Happened, Brittany Murphy, sought to explore the circumstances surrounding her death, delving into her personal life, career pressures, and relationship with husband Simon Monjack. While the series aimed to provide insight, it also reignited public interest and speculation, with some critics arguing that it leaned towards sensationalism rather than offering definitive answers. The proliferation of conspiracy theories and media scrutiny had a profound impact on Murphy's family, particularly her mother, Sharon Murphy. In a public letter, Sharon vehemently denied allegations of poisoning and criticized the media for perpetuating unfounded rumors that tarnished her daughter's memory. She emphasized that the official autopsy findings were conclusive and urged the public to respect Brittany's legacy. Despite official statements and expert opinions, the narrative surrounding Brittany Murphy's death remains clouded by speculation. The interplay between media sensationalism and public fascination with celebrity tragedies has ensured that questions linger, overshadowing the actress's accomplishments and contributions to the entertainment industry. Brittany Murphy's unexpected death in December 2009 sent shockwaves through Hollywood and her global fan base. Known for her versatility and magnetic presence, Murphy's career spanned from breakout roles in Clueless and 8 Mile to voice work in King of the Hill. Her passing at 32 left a void in the entertainment industry. Colleagues and friends have consistently highlighted Murphy's genuine nature and talent. Director Amy Heckerling, who cast her in Clueless, remarked on Murphy's authenticity, stating she just felt like a sweet girl who kinda didn't fit in with the others. Dakota Fanning, her co-star in Uptown Girls, remembered Murphy as a ray of sunshine who made every day on set magical. Despite her accomplishments, Murphy's legacy has been somewhat overshadowed by the circumstances of her death. Critics have noted that she died too young to establish a lasting legacy and too quietly for posthumous superstardom. However, her performances continue to resonate, with films like Clueless and 8 Mile remaining cultural touchstones. In the years following her death, tributes have poured in from fans and industry peers alike. Social media platforms see annual remembrances on her birthday and the anniversary of her passing. Documentaries and articles have revisited her life and career, aiming to celebrate her contributions and shed light on the pressures she faced in Hollywood. Murphy's final resting place is at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills, a site visited by fans who leave flowers and notes in her memory. Her gravestone reads, "Our precious daughter, wife, and angel to all," encapsulating the affection held for her by those who knew her personally and through her work. While Brittany Murphy's life was tragically cut short, her impact endures. Through her memorable performances and the fond recollections of those who worked with her, Murphy's spirit continues to inspire and captivate audiences worldwide. Tara Grinstead, a 30-year-old high school history teacher and former beauty queen, vanished from her home in Ocilla, Georgia on October 22, 2005. That evening, she attended a beauty pageant and later visited a cookout hosted by a local school superintendent. She was last seen leaving the event around 11 p.m. When Tara failed to appear at work on Monday, October 24th, colleagues grew concerned. A friend visited her home and found her car in the driveway, but the front door was locked and there was no sign of Tara. Inside, her cell phone was charging and her purse and keys were missing. A broken lamp and a latex glove were discovered in the yard, raising suspicions of foul play. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, joined local authorities in an extensive search. But despite numerous tips and interviews, Tara's whereabouts remained unknown. The case garnered national attention, but leads were scarce, and the investigation eventually went cold. In the days following Tara Grinstead's disappearance, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, joined local authorities in an extensive search. Investigators found a latex glove in the front yard of Grinstead's home, which contained DNA from Grinstead and an unknown male. This discovery was considered a critical piece of evidence. Despite analyzing the DNA and comparing it to numerous individuals, no match was found at the time. The glove's presence suggested a struggle or an attempt to clean up evidence, but without a DNA match, the investigation faced significant challenges. Investigators also noted other peculiarities at Grinstead's home. Her cell phone was charging, her purse and keys were missing, and there was no sign of forced entry. These details added to the mystery, but did not provide concrete leads. The GBI continued to receive tips and conducted interviews, but the case remained unsolved, gradually becoming one of Georgia's most perplexing missing person cases. In the years following Tara Grinstead's disappearance, the investigation yielded few substantial leads. Despite extensive efforts, including DNA analysis of a latex glove found at the scene, authorities were unable to identify a suspect. The glove contained DNA from Grinstead and an unknown male, but comparisons with numerous individuals produced no matches. The case remained in the public eye, with media coverage and community interest keeping it from fading entirely. In 2008, A report on the CBS News show 48 Hours Mystery brought renewed attention, highlighting the similarities between Grinstead's case and other missing person cases. In 2016, the Up and Vanished podcast, hosted by Payne Lindsay, focused on Grinstead's case, reigniting public interest and prompting new tips. The podcast's investigative approach and widespread reach brought fresh attention to the case, leading to increased scrutiny and eventually contributing to a breakthrough in the investigation. In February 2017, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, announced a significant development in the Tara Grinstead case. Ryan Alexander Duke, a former student at Irwin County High School, where Grinstead taught, was arrested and charged with her murder. Duke confessed to killing Grinstead during a burglary at her home in October 2005. According to his statement, he entered her residence intending to steal money for drugs, but when confronted by Grinstead, he strangled her and later disposed of her body. Following Duke's arrest, authorities apprehended Bo Dukes, a former classmate of Duke. Dukes was charged with concealing Grinstead's death, hindering the apprehension of a criminal, and tampering with evidence. Investigators learned that after the murder, Duke enlisted Duke's help to dispose of Grinstead's body. The two men transported her remains to a pecan orchard in Ben Hill County, where they burned the body over several days. The arrests marked a turning point in the decade-long investigation. Duke's confession provided details that aligned with evidence collected at the crime scene, including a latex glove found in Grinstead's yard, containing DNA from both Grinstead and an unknown male. Although the confession was later recanted, it led investigators to the location where Grinstead's remains were believed to have been destroyed. The community of Ocilla, Georgia, reacted with a mix of relief and sorrow. Grinstead's family expressed gratitude for the progress in the case, while also mourning the confirmation of her death. The arrests brought national attention back to the case, highlighting the persistence of investigators and the impact of renewed public interest. In May 2022, Ryan Duke stood trial in Irwin County, Georgia, facing charges related to the 2005 disappearance and death of Tara Grinstead. The prosecution presented Duke's 2017 confession, in which he admitted to killing Grinstead during a burglary and later burning her body with the help of Bo Dukes. However, during the trial, Duke recanted his confession, asserting that he had lied to investigators out of fear and intoxication, and claimed that Bo Dukes was the actual perpetrator. After deliberation, the jury found Duke not guilty of murder, aggravated assault, and burglary, but convicted him of concealing Grinstead's death. He received the maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. Bo Dukes faced his own legal proceedings. In March 2019, he was tried in Wilcox County for concealing Grinstead's death, hindering the apprehension of a criminal and making false statements. The jury found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. In February 2025, the Georgia Court of Appeals delivered a pivotal ruling in the Tara Grinstead case, impacting both Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes. The court determined that the statute of limitations had expired for charges filed against the men in Ben Hill County, leading to the dismissal of these charges. The court's decision centered on the timing of probable cause. While prosecutors argued that the statute of limitations began with the men's confessions in 2017, the appeals court concluded that law enforcement had sufficient probable cause by late November 2005. This was based on a tip received shortly after Grinstead's disappearance, where a man reported that Duke and Dukes had confessed to killing Grinstead and burning her body. As a result, the 4-year statute of limitations for the charges in Ben Hill County had expired long before the men were indicted in 2017 and 2022. the court's ruling did not affect prior convictions in other counties. Ryan Duke remains incarcerated, serving a 10-year sentence for concealing Grinstead's death, while Bo Dukes continues to serve a 25-year sentence for his role in covering up the crime. Tara Grinstead's disappearance in 2005 left an indelible mark on the small town of Ocilla, Georgia. The community, once tightly knit, grappled with the uncertainty and fear that accompanied the unresolved case. Residents organized search parties, distributed flyers, and held vigils, demonstrating their commitment to finding answers. The prolonged investigation tested the town's resilience, but the eventual arrests in 2017 brought a mix of relief and renewed grief. As one local resident noted, "It's rampant that there's someone in custody," reflecting the widespread discussions and emotions stirred by the developments. The legal proceedings that followed highlighted challenges within the justice system, particularly concerning the statute of limitations. In 2025, the Georgia Court of Appeals dismissed pending charges against Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes in Ben Hill County, citing that the statute of limitations had expired. The court determined that law enforcement had probable cause as early as November 2005, based on a tip received shortly after Grinstead's disappearance. This ruling underscored the importance of timely action in criminal investigations and the complexities involved in prosecuting cold cases. The case also prompted discussions about victim blaming and the portrayal of women in media. Speculation about Grinstead's personal life surfaced during the investigation, leading to debates about the relevance and appropriateness of such scrutiny. Advocates emphasize the need to focus on the facts of the case and to treat victims with dignity and respect, regardless of their personal choices. As of 2025, both Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes remain incarcerated for their roles in concealing Grinstead's death. While the legal proceedings have concluded, the impact of the case continues to resonate in Ocilla and beyond. Grinstead's legacy endures through the memories of those who knew her, and the broader conversations her case has sparked about justice, media influence, and community resilience. Kimberly LaGale McCarthy was born on May 11, 1961, in Greenville, Texas. Her early life remains relatively undocumented in public records, but by the time she reached adulthood, McCarthy had become a licensed occupational therapist. At some point, she moved to Dallas, Texas, where she married Aaron Michaels, a former Black Panther and co-founder of the new Black Panther Party. Together, they had a son, though the relationship eventually dissolved. McCarthy's life began to unravel as she struggled with substance abuse, particularly crack cocaine addiction. Her dependency on drugs marked a turning point that led her down a path of criminal behavior. Throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, she accrued several criminal convictions. These included forgery, prostitution, and the theft of services. Her previous arrests reflected a growing instability in her life, each charge pulling her further from the stability she had once known as a medical professional. By the mid-1990s, McCarthy's addiction had taken control of her life. She was no longer employed in her field, and her financial circumstances had significantly deteriorated. Reports indicate that she supported her drug habit by engaging in criminal activities. Law enforcement documents show that she was known to have committed multiple acts of theft and fraud. Despite her background in healthcare and a family to anchor her, McCarthy's continued descent into addiction and crime placed her on the radar of Texas law enforcement. Friends and acquaintances described her as increasingly isolated and erratic, often vanishing for days at a time. Her circumstances made her vulnerable and desperate, conditions which, tragically, would culminate in a brutal act of violence. As her life spiraled, McCarthy's association with drug dealers and users became routine. Records from Dallas County suggest she often used stolen checks and credit cards to obtain cash and goods, feeding an addiction that had by then become all-consuming. By 1997, she was living in Lancaster, a suburb of Dallas, in a modest home not far from her next and final victim, Dorothy Booth. Dorothy Booth, a retired college professor and neighbor, would soon become central to a case that would mark a significant chapter in Texas's criminal justice history. But before that fateful encounter, McCarthy was a woman in freefall, once respected in her profession, now increasingly desperate, isolated, and under the grip of a debilitating addiction. On the afternoon of July 21st, 1997, in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Lancaster, Texas, a horrific crime unfolded that would shock the local community and later attract national attention. Kimberly McCarthy, then 36 years old and battling a severe addiction to crack cocaine, targeted her 71-year-old neighbor, Dorothy Booth. Booth, a retired psychology professor at Texas Woman's University, lived alone in a modest brick home. Known for her kindness and devotion to her church, Booth was not someone who would typically have enemies. According to investigators, McCarthy approached Booth's residence around 4:30 p.m., using the pretense of borrowing a cup of sugar as a way to gain entry. Booth, trusting and generous, allowed her in. Once inside, the situation escalated quickly. McCarthy attacked Booth, striking her in the face with a candelabrum and stabbing her 5 times with a butcher knife. Evidence later indicated that the violence was not random, but calculated and driven by McCarthy's desperate need for drug money. After killing Booth, McCarthy severed the elderly woman's left ring finger to remove her diamond wedding ring. She then stole Booth's purse and drove away in her white Mercedes-Benz. McCarthy would later use Booth's credit cards at several locations, including a liquor store and a pawn shop. Investigators recovered receipts and surveillance footage confirming these transactions. McCarthy also attempted to cash one of Booth's checks and pawn the diamond ring for approximately $200. Booth's body was discovered by her neighbor and longtime friend, who had grown concerned after not hearing from her. The scene that greeted police officers was brutal. Signs of struggle, blood spatter, and a body left in the living room. The cause of death was determined to be multiple stab wounds, and the attack was classified as a robbery homicide. The severing of the finger shocked even seasoned investigators. Law enforcement quickly turned their attention to McCarthy. Within days, they found Booth's identification and stolen property in her possession. Booth's stolen vehicle was located abandoned. Fingerprints, credit card usage, and witness accounts placed McCarthy at the center of the investigation. DNA evidence collected from the scene, including the murder weapon, further corroborated her involvement. McCarthy did not deny her presence at Booth's house, but initially claimed she found Booth already dead and fled in a panic. This statement was inconsistent with physical evidence. By the end of the week, she was formally arrested and charged with capital murder. The investigation into Dorothy Booth's murder progressed swiftly due to a wealth of physical and circumstantial evidence. The brutality of the crime and the apparent motive, a robbery turned homicide, meant detectives were under immediate pressure to identify and apprehend the suspect. Within hours of discovering Booth's body, Lancaster police began reconstructing her final moments. Crime scene technicians documented extensive blood evidence and signs of a violent struggle in Booth's home. The wounds indicated a sustained and frenzied attack. Forensic analysis later confirmed the presence of Kimberly McCarthy's DNA on the murder weapon. a large butcher knife recovered from the kitchen. Booth's severed finger was never found, but the absence of her wedding ring and the sharp force injuries around her left hand were consistent with theft. Investigators canvassed the neighborhood and interviewed Booth's friends and neighbors. One witness recalled seeing Booth with a woman, matching McCarthy's description earlier that day. Surveillance footage and financial records soon offered more concrete links. Just hours after Booth's death, McCarthy used Booth's stolen credit cards at a gas station and a liquor store. These purchases were captured on security cameras, clearly showing McCarthy at the counter. Further evidence came from a pawn shop, where McCarthy sold a diamond ring they later identified as Booth's. Investigators obtained a receipt and interviewed the shop owner, who confirmed McCarthy had conducted the transaction using her own ID. Police also traced McCarthy's attempts to forge Booth's name on checks, an effort to access the victim's bank account. McCarthy was already known to local law enforcement for prior offenses, which included forgery, theft, and drug possession. Her fingerprints were on file and matched those found inside Booth's home. Police executed a search warrant at McCarthy's residence, where they found Booth's driver's license, credit cards, and other personal effects, as well as the candelabrum suspected to have been used in the attack. On July 24, 1997, just 3 days after the murder, Kimberly McCarthy was arrested at her home. During interrogation, she initially denied any involvement, but later admitted to entering Booth's home and using her credit cards. She maintained, however, that she had found Booth already deceased and panicked. Investigators dismissed the claim, citing the overwhelming physical evidence and the forensic timeline. McCarthy was formally charged with capital murder. Given the brutal nature of the crime and the evidence of premeditation and robbery, the Dallas County District Attorney's Office announced they would seek the death penalty. McCarthy was held without bail as she awaited trial, facing what would become a high-profile prosecution. Kimberly McCarthy's capital murder trial began in 1998 in Dallas County, Texas. The prosecution, led by the Dallas County District Attorney's Office, aimed to prove that McCarthy had committed a calculated, violent robbery murder driven by her addiction to crack cocaine. The central charge was capital murder, which in Texas can carry the death penalty when a homicide is committed in the course of another felony, such as robbery. The state's case was built upon a solid foundation of physical and circumstantial evidence. Prosecutors introduced DNA findings that placed McCarthy at the crime scene, including her blood on the knife used in the killing. Testimony from forensic experts confirmed the knife had Booth's and McCarthy's DNA on the handle and blade, reinforcing that it had been used by McCarthy during the attack. Additionally, fingerprints recovered from Booth's vehicle and inside her home matched McCarthy's. The prosecution also presented surveillance footage showing McCarthy using Booth's credit cards hours after the murder. The pawn shop owner testified that McCarthy sold a diamond ring, later confirmed to be Booth's the same day. These actions, prosecutors argued, showed a clear and immediate effort to profit from Booth's death. Witnesses, including neighbors and store clerks, supported the timeline that placed McCarthy in possession of Booth's belongings shortly after the time of death. McCarthy's defense team acknowledged her drug addiction, but argued that there was insufficient evidence to prove she committed the murder. They attempted to cast doubt on the reliability of the physical evidence and pointed to her statements that she had found Booth dead upon arrival. They also questioned the timeline of events and suggested alternate explanations for her possession of Booth's property, though they presented no witnesses who could confirm these claims. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning a guilty verdict on the capital murder charge. During the sentencing phase, prosecutors introduced evidence from McCarthy's criminal history. including prior convictions for forgery and theft. They also detailed allegations connecting her to two other elderly women who were murdered under similar circumstances, though she was never formally charged in those cases. The prosecution argued these incidents showed a pattern of violent behavior. The defense countered by highlighting McCarthy's background, including her professional career and her role as a mother, arguing that life imprisonment would be a more appropriate sentence. However, the jury was unmoved. On November 24, 1998, Kimberly McCarthy was sentenced to death by lethal injection. She was transferred to the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas, where she would remain on death row as her legal team began the lengthy appeals process. Following her 1998 conviction and death sentence, Kimberly McCarthy began the appellate process that is standard in capital cases in Texas. Her legal team filed a direct appeal to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, arguing that her trial had been compromised by procedural errors and that the evidence presented was insufficient to justify the death penalty. In 2002, the court affirmed her conviction and sentence, ruling that the trial had been fair and that the evidence supported the jury's verdict. McCarthy then filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus in state court. Her attorneys raised multiple claims, including ineffective assistance of counsel, improper jury instructions, and questions surrounding the admission of alleged extraneous offenses during the sentencing phase. The habeas court reviewed these claims, but found them without merit. In 2006, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied relief. Moving to federal court, McCarthy's team filed a petition in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Texas. They again challenged the effectiveness of her trial attorneys and argued that the introduction of uncharged offenses had unfairly influenced the jury. The court denied the petition in 2009, finding that her legal representation met constitutional standards and that the additional evidence presented at sentencing had not prejudiced the outcome. The case then advanced to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. In July 2012, the court upheld the lower court's decision. The panel rejected arguments that McCarthy's trial was fundamentally flawed and concluded that her rights had not been violated. The court stated that the evidence of guilt was overwhelming and that the trial court had acted within its discretion. McCarthy's final legal recourse was an appeal to the United States Supreme Court. Her attorneys filed a petition for a writ of certiorari in late 2012, asking the court to consider whether her constitutional rights had been infringed during the trial and appeals process. On January 7, 2013, the Supreme Court denied the petition without comment, effectively ending McCarthy's legal avenues for relief. With all appeals exhausted, a date for her execution was scheduled by the state of Texas. The case now moved from the courtroom to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's scheduling office. McCarthy, who had spent nearly 15 years on death row, would now face execution. Throughout the appeals, McCarthy maintained her innocence in the Booth murder. Her supporters argued that racial bias, inadequate legal representation, and the use of uncharged crimes in the sentencing phase warranted a reconsideration of her case. Still, the courts consistently upheld the validity of her conviction and sentence, setting the stage for the final chapter of her legal journey. Following the denial of her final federal appeal in January 2013, Kimberly McCarthy was scheduled for execution by lethal injection on January 29, 2013. This would have made her the first woman executed in the United States since 2010, and the 13th woman executed in Texas since the Civil War. However, the planned execution did not proceed as scheduled due to a series of delays and legal developments initiated by her defense team. In the weeks leading up to the scheduled execution, McCarthy's lawyers filed motions in state and federal courts, raising concerns about racial disparities in jury selection and the presentation of alleged unadjudicated offenses during the sentencing phase. They argued that systemic racial bias may have influenced her trial, noting that McCarthy, a black woman, had been convicted by a nearly all-white jury in Dallas County. On January 29, 2013, just hours before McCarthy was to be executed, Judge Larry Mitchell of the 283rd Judicial District Court in Dallas granted a temporary reprieve. The delay was issued to allow her legal team time to pursue a new appeal focusing on the jury selection process and the constitutionality of executing individuals in cases with unresolved questions of racial discrimination. This development postponed the execution date to April 3, 2013. During the reprieve period, McCarthy's attorneys filed a petition in the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, asking for a stay of execution and review of the jury selection claims. They contended that qualified black jurors were improperly excluded from the trial, a pattern observed in other Dallas County capital cases. However, on March 26, 2013, the court denied the request for a stay and refused to review the new claims, citing procedural grounds. With that denial, the April execution was back on schedule. Nevertheless, McCarthy's team submitted a new appeal to the federal courts, arguing that Texas's administration of the death penalty was flawed and discriminatory. They also highlighted issues concerning lethal injection protocols. On April 3, 2013, McCarthy received a second reprieve, this time from the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which pushed her execution to June 26, 2013. The state cited the need for further review of McCarthy's claims and possible revisions in legal filings as the reason for the second delay. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice rescheduled her execution accordingly. At this point, McCarthy had become a central figure in the debate over race and the death penalty in Texas, and her case drew national and international attention from civil rights groups and anti-death penalty advocates. As the new date approached, it became clear there would be no further delays. All courts had declined to intervene, and McCarthy's legal options had been fully exhausted. She remained housed in the Mountain View unit in Gatesville until her scheduled transfer to the Huntsville unit, where executions are carried out in Texas. On June 26, 2013, Kimberly McCarthy was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. The execution marked the end of a legal journey that had lasted over 15 years, beginning with her conviction in 1998 for the murder of 71-year-old Dorothy Booth. McCarthy's case had become notable not only for the crime itself, but also for her status as the 500th person executed by Texas since the state resumed capital punishment in 1982. On the day of the execution, McCarthy was transferred from the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, where female death row inmates are held, to the Huntsville unit, commonly referred to as the Walls unit. She spent her final hours in a holding cell adjacent to the execution chamber. Her final meal request reportedly included fried fish, cornbread, okra, and a Dr. Pepper. Texas had officially ended special last meal requests in 2011, so McCarthy received the standard prison meal offered that day. At 6:18 p.m., McCarthy was escorted to the gurney in the execution chamber. Witnesses to the execution included journalists, prison officials, and representatives of the victim's family. As the lethal injection process began, McCarthy was given the opportunity to make a final statement. Her last words were, "This is not a loss. This is a win. You know where I'm going. I'm going home to Jesus. I love you all. God is great." These words were directed to a group of supporters who had remained in contact with her during her time on death row. McCarthy showed no visible signs of fear or distress, maintaining a calm demeanor throughout the process. At 6:26 p.m., the lethal dose of pentobarbital was administered. McCarthy closed her eyes and took several deep breaths before ceasing movement. She was pronounced dead at 6:37 p.m., 11 minutes after the injection began. Outside the prison, demonstrators from both sides of the death penalty debate had gathered. Opponents of capital punishment held vigils and prayer circles, while proponents expressed support for the sentence. Booth's family did not attend the execution, but later released a statement saying they hoped her death would bring closure to those who knew and loved Dorothy Booth. McCarthy was the first woman executed in the United States in nearly 3 years, and only the fourth woman executed in Texas since 1976. Her execution reignited debates about the application of the death penalty in Texas, particularly in cases involving racial dynamics, legal representation, and the role of mitigating circumstances such as drug addiction. Kimberly McCarthy's body was transported to a funeral home after an autopsy, and arrangements were made by family members for burial. Her death marked the end of a case that had been followed by legal scholars, activists, and the public alike. The execution of Kimberly McCarthy on June 26, 2013, drew significant public and media attention, not only because of the brutality of the crime, but also due to the broader implications of her case. As the 500th execution carried out by the state of Texas since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976, McCarthy's death became a symbolic flashpoint in the ongoing debate over capital punishment in the United States. Advocacy groups, including Amnesty International and the American Civil Liberties Union, issued statements condemning the execution. They highlighted concerns about racial bias, noting that McCarthy, an African-American woman, was convicted by a jury that included only one black juror in a county with a documented history of racial disparities in jury selection. These organizations used McCarthy's case to illustrate what they described as systemic inequities in the criminal justice system, particularly in death penalty prosecutions. Civil rights leaders also voiced concerns. The NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund pointed out that McCarthy's trial included allegations about unrelated past crimes during the sentencing phase, none of which had led to charges or convictions. They argued this practice undermined the fairness of the sentencing process. The organization called for a moratorium on executions in Texas, pending a comprehensive review of racial bias and procedural fairness. Religious groups joined the response, holding vigils across the country. In Huntsville, Texas, a small group gathered outside the prison, holding signs that read, "Not in our name," and "End the death penalty." Faith-based organizations emphasize themes of redemption and rehabilitation, arguing that McCarthy's addiction and troubled past were factors that should have warranted a life sentence rather than death. Media outlets in the United States and abroad covered the execution extensively. International reactions were particularly strong in Europe, where the death penalty has been abolished in all member states of the European Union. Some commentators expressed shock that Texas had reached 500 executions, viewing the milestone as indicative of what they saw as the United States' outlier status among Western democracies on the issue of capital punishment. On the other side, some Texas officials and supporters of the death penalty saw McCarthy's execution as a justified and necessary conclusion to a heinous crime. They emphasized the brutality of the murder, McCarthy's clear guilt, and the long legal process that allowed her to appeal the sentence over 15 years. State prosecutors defended the fairness of the trial and the thoroughness of the appeals process. The family of Dorothy Booth issued a brief public statement after the execution. While they did not attend the procedure, they expressed hope that the case's resolution would bring peace and closure. They described Booth as a deeply spiritual, kind-hearted woman whose life had been senselessly taken. "Justice has been served," one family member was quoted as saying. Kimberly McCarthy's case became a reference point in broader discussions about capital punishment in the United States, particularly in Texas, which leads the nation in executions. Her status as the 500th person executed by the state since 1982 placed the spotlight on Texas's capital punishment system and reignited debates over its fairness, application, and long-term social impact. One major area of controversy centered around the role of race in McCarthy's trial and sentencing. Civil rights organizations, legal scholars, and death penalty opponents cited the racial composition of McCarthy's jury as problematic. Despite Dallas County's diverse population, 11 of the 12 jurors in McCarthy's trial were white. Advocates pointed to evidence suggesting that prosecutors in Dallas County had historically used peremptory challenges to disproportionately exclude black jurors, raising questions about whether McCarthy received a fair trial. In addition, concerns about the quality of McCarthy's legal representation surfaced repeatedly during the appeals process. Her defense attorneys in the initial trial were accused of failing to adequately challenge the state's introduction of unadjudicated prior offenses. Although these offenses were not formally charged, they were presented to the jury during sentencing to argue for the death penalty. Critics argued this practice unfairly prejudiced the jury and created the impression of a pattern of violent behavior without due process. The issue of executing women also received renewed attention. Female executions are rare in the United States, and McCarthy's case reignited ethical debates about gender and capital punishment. Opponents argued that systemic issues like poverty, abuse histories, and mental illness, often present in the background of female offenders, warranted alternative sentencing. In McCarthy's case, her long-term crack cocaine addiction and prior criminal record were cited as contributing factors, though these did not mitigate the jury's decision. The method of execution also came under scrutiny. Texas, like other states, used a single-drug, lethal injection protocol involving pentobarbital. Legal experts raised concerns about the sourcing and reliability of the drug, especially after European manufacturers restricted its sale for use in executions. Questions about drug efficacy, potential suffering, and ethical sourcing led some to call for moratoriums on executions until these issues were addressed. Finally, the symbolic milestone of Texas's 500th execution sparked broader philosophical questions about the efficacy and morality of the death penalty. While supporters claimed that capital punishment served as a deterrent and a form of justice, empirical studies questioned its impact on crime rates. Additionally, concerns about wrongful convictions, racial bias, and the high cost of capital trials continued to fuel advocacy for abolition. Kimberly McCarthy's case, marked by its legal complexities and public scrutiny, became emblematic of the contentious and often polarizing nature of the death penalty in America. It remains cited in policy discussions and legal literature addressing reform, equity, and the future of capital punishment. The case of Kimberly McCarthy left a complex legacy within the American legal and social landscape. While the execution closed a chapter for the judicial system, it opened new discussions about justice, race, and the future of capital punishment. For many observers, McCarthy's story underscored persistent questions about how the U.S. administers the death penalty and the degree to which it upholds principles of fairness and equality. Her execution marked a milestone, the 500th in Texas since 1982. But behind that number was a broader reflection on the state's commitment to capital punishment. Texas continued to account for a significant portion of U.S. executions, leading to scrutiny from domestic and international human rights organizations. McCarthy's case became part of this larger critique, often cited in legal studies, academic conferences, and legislative hearings examining the use of the death penalty in high-volume states. Legal professionals and criminal justice advocates pointed to her case as illustrative of deeper structural issues: disparities in sentencing based on race, inconsistencies in jury selection practices, and the use of uncharged allegations during sentencing. Although courts consistently upheld McCarthy's conviction and sentence, questions lingered about whether her trial was free of bias and whether adequate safeguards were in place to ensure an impartial process. For some legal analysts, McCarthy's background, her career as a therapist, her descent into addiction, and her earlier nonviolent offenses suggested a narrative of personal decline shaped by systemic failures. They emphasized the need for earlier intervention and more robust rehabilitation options, arguing that incarceration alone failed to address root causes like substance abuse and mental health. While McCarthy was convicted of a particularly brutal crime, her trajectory raised difficult questions about prevention and treatment. The impact on the family of Dorothy Booth was lasting. Booth's relatives remembered her as a devoted mother, educator, and church member. The crime that ended her life was senseless and devastating, and the legal process, though long, ultimately brought a conclusion they had waited over 15 years to reach. Still, for many survivors of violent crime, closure remains elusive, even with a conviction and execution. McCarthy's case continues to be referenced in debates over gender and capital punishment. As one of the few women executed in modern American history, her death highlighted the rarity and gravity of such sentences for female defendants. Researchers studying female capital cases noted patterns of prior trauma, addiction, and socioeconomic disadvantage, elements also present in McCarthy's life. These findings have informed advocacy for more nuanced approaches to criminal sentencing. Years after her execution, Kimberly McCarthy's name remains associated not only with the tragic death of Dorothy Booth, but with the legal and ethical debates surrounding America's use of the ultimate punishment. Her case, preserved in legal archives, law reviews, and advocacy materials, continues to prompt reflection on justice, accountability, and reform in the nation's most severe criminal cases. On October 27, 1989, Amy Mihaljevich, a bright and outgoing 10-year-old girl, left her school in Bay Village, Ohio, a quiet suburban community on the western edge of Cleveland. Like many children in the area, she had a predictable routine. She would often walk home or head to a nearby shopping plaza, Bay Square, which was a popular after-school hangout for local kids. What set this Friday apart was a secret phone call Amy had received a few days earlier. According to statements from her friends and later confirmed by investigators, a man had contacted Amy at home while her mother, Margaret Mihaljevich, was at work. The caller claimed he wanted to help her buy a gift for her mother, who had recently earned a promotion at work. He told Amy to meet him at the Bay Square shopping center after school. Investigators believe he gained her trust by mentioning personal details that made the story plausible to a child. Amy kept the call a secret from her family, but confided in a few close friends. One of them later told police that Amy was nervous but excited about the planned meeting. Surveillance of public phone records and interviews would later reveal that similar calls had been made to other girls in nearby towns, though none had followed through with a meeting. Amy's case would become the only one to result in an abduction. On that October afternoon, witnesses recalled seeing Amy at Bay Square around 2 o'clock to 3 p.m. Several people, including classmates and shop employees, later reported seeing her talking to a man outside the Baskin-Robbins ice cream shop. He was described as white, in his 30s, slightly unshaven, with medium-length hair, possibly wearing a beige windbreaker. Amy appeared calm and unafraid. One witness saw her walking across the parking lot with the man. It was the last confirmed sighting of Amy Mihaljevic alive. When Amy did not return home that evening, her mother became alarmed and contacted police. An official missing person report was filed, and a community-wide search began. At the time, abductions by strangers were considered rare in Bay Village, and residents were shocked that such a crime could occur in their closely knit town. Bay Village police, soon joined by the FBI, launched an extensive investigation. They interviewed classmates, family members, and local businesses, and canvassed the area for any signs of Amy. Flyers with her photo were distributed across Northeast Ohio. The image of a smiling girl with light brown hair and glasses quickly became known nationwide, symbolizing the vulnerability of children and the urgency of finding her. Investigators quickly focused on the unknown caller as a prime suspect. Through interviews and tips, they compiled a profile of a man who had used charm and manipulation to lure a child into a trap. Despite the intensity of the investigation, no immediate leads led to Amy's discovery. As the days turned into weeks, concern grew. Yet the community held on to hope that Amy would be found and returned home safely. The last call she received remained the most crucial piece of the puzzle, a calculated lie that marked the beginning of one of Ohio's most haunting unsolved crimes. On Friday, October 27, 1989, Amy Mihaljevic, a 10-year-old fifth grader, left Bay Village Middle School in Ohio and walked to the Bay Square shopping center. She had arranged to meet a man who had called her earlier that week, claiming he wanted her help in selecting a gift for her mother's recent promotion. Amy was last seen around 2 p.m., talking to a man described as white, in his 30s, with medium-length hair, possibly wearing a beige windbreaker. Witnesses observed the man placing his hand on Amy's shoulder as they walked through the parking lot together. No vehicle was seen. When Amy did not return home that evening, her mother, Margaret Mihaljevic, contacted the Bay Village Police Department to report her missing. An extensive search ensued, involving local law enforcement, the FBI, and community volunteers. Flyers with Amy's photograph were distributed, and the case received national media attention. Despite numerous tips and leads, Amy remained missing for over 3 months. On February 8, 1990, a jogger discovered Amy's body in a field off County Road 1181 in Ruggles Township, Ashland County, approximately 50 miles from Bay Village. The body was clothed in the same outfit Amy had been wearing on the day of her disappearance. Several personal items were missing, including her turquoise horsehead earrings, black ankle boots, a denim backpack, and a black leather binder with "Buick Best in Class" written on it. These items have never been recovered. An autopsy determined that Amy had died from a combination of stab wounds to the neck and a blow to the head. The presence of yellow gold fibers on her body suggested she had been in contact with a blanket or curtain. Investigators believe her body was likely dumped in the field shortly after her abduction. The discovery of Amy's body intensified the investigation. But despite the efforts of law enforcement and the community, her killer has never been identified. The case remains open, with authorities continuing to pursue leads and advancements in forensic technology, offering hope for a resolution. On February 8, 1990, a jogger in rural Ashland County, Ohio, discovered the decomposing body of 10-year-old Amy Mihaljevich in a field off County Road 1181 in Ruggles Township. The location was approximately 50 miles from where Amy had been abducted in Bay Village. Her body was found clothed in the same outfit she had been wearing on the day of her disappearance. Several personal items were missing, including her turquoise horsehead earrings, black ankle boots, a denim backpack, and a black leather binder with "Buick Best in Class" written on it. These items have never been recovered. An autopsy determined that Amy had died from a combination of stab wounds to the neck and a blow to the head. The presence of yellow gold fibers on her body suggested she has been in contact with a blanket or curtain. Investigators believe her body was likely dumped in the field shortly after her abduction. Approximately 100 yards from where Amy's body was found, investigators recovered a curtain. Within that curtain was a dog hair that matched the Mihaljevich family's dog, suggesting that Amy had been wrapped in it at some point. The discovery of Amy's body intensified the investigation, but despite the efforts of law enforcement and the community, her killer has never been identified. The case remains open, with authorities continuing to pursue leads and advancements in forensic technology, offering hope for a resolution. The investigation into Amy Mihaljevich's abduction and murder has spanned decades, with numerous pieces of evidence collected and analyzed in hopes of identifying her killer. Missing personal items. Several personal items Amy had with her at the time of her disappearance were never recovered. These include her turquoise horsehead earrings, black ankle boots, a denim backpack, and a black leather binder with "Buick Best in Class" written on it. The absence of these items suggests the perpetrator may have taken them as souvenirs or to eliminate potential evidence. Forensic discoveries. At the crime scene, investigators found a homemade curtain approximately 100 yards from where Amy's body was discovered. This curtain contained a dog hair that matched the Mihaljevich family's dog, indicating Amy had been in contact with it. Additionally, yellow gold fibers were found on her body, suggesting she had been in contact with a blanket or curtain. In 2021, it was announced that a curtain found several hundred yards from her body had her DNA on it, indicating it may have been used to wrap her body. Advances in DNA analysis. Recent advancements in DNA technology have provided new avenues for investigation. In 2024, Bay Village police announced that male DNA had been found on Amy's sweatpants. Although the sample was too small to create a profile at the time, ongoing developments in DNA testing may soon allow for identification. Further, in 2025, it was reported that hair found on the curtain and blanket near Amy's body was being analyzed using new DNA testing methods capable of extracting profiles from degraded samples. These efforts aim to identify whether the hair belongs to a suspect. Over the decades since Amy Mihaljevich's 1989 abduction and murder, investigators have scrutinized numerous individuals, yet no one has been charged. The case has remained a focal point for law enforcement, with advancements in forensic science offering renewed avenues for inquiry. Early investigations. In the immediate aftermath of Amy's disappearance, the Bay Village Police Department and the FBI conducted extensive interviews, amassing information on potential suspects. Witnesses described a man seen with Amy at the Bay Square Shopping Center, a white male in his 30s, wearing a beige windbreaker and khaki pants, with medium-length hair. This composite sketch became central to the investigation. Despite the widespread dissemination of the sketch, no definitive identification was made. Similar incidents. Investigators discovered that other young girls in nearby towns had received similar phone calls from an unknown man, who claimed to know their mothers and requested assistance in selecting a gift. These calls, reported in North Olmsted and other suburbs, suggested a pattern. However, none of these girls met the caller, and the incidents did not lead to abductions. The commonalities among these cases provided leads but no concrete suspects. Advances in DNA analysis. In recent years, advancements in DNA technology have provided new opportunities. In 2024, investigators announced the discovery of male DNA on Amy's sweatpants. Although the sample was too small to create a full profile, ongoing developments in DNA testing may soon allow for identification. Detective Sergeant J.E. Leash expressed optimism, stating that new DNA tests on the horizon could identify profiles from minimal samples. Renewed focus on individuals. In 2020, a woman reported that her ex-boyfriend, who lived near the abduction site, exhibited suspicious behavior around the time of Amy's disappearance. He allegedly made unusual comments about the case and had a niece in the same grade as Amy. Investigators obtained his DNA and conducted a polygraph test, which he failed. While this individual remains a person of interest, no charges have been filed. Ongoing investigation. The case continues to be actively investigated. Detectives are re-examining evidence with modern forensic techniques, including testing hairs found on a curtain and blanket near Amy's body using advanced DNA methods. These efforts aim to identify whether the hair belongs to a suspect. Despite the passage of time, law enforcement remains committed to solving Amy Mihalevich's case. The integration of new technologies and persistent investigative work sustain hope that justice will eventually be served. In the decades since Amy Mihalevich's tragic abduction and murder in 1989, advancements in forensic science have offered renewed hope in solving this enduring cold case. Recent developments in DNA analysis and forensic technology have provided investigators with new avenues to pursue. Discovery of male DNA on Amy's clothing. In August 2024, scientists at DNA Labs International in Deerfield Beach, Florida, detected previously unidentified male DNA on Amy's sweatpants. This discovery was made using the MVAC system, a specialized forensic vacuum designed to collect DNA from porous materials. However, the amount of DNA obtained was insufficient to create a full profile. Rachel Uffeline, Chief Scientific Officer at DNA Labs International, noted that emerging technologies might soon allow for the analysis of such minimal samples. Analysis of hair evidence. Approximately 300 yards from where Amy's body was discovered, investigators found a curtain and blanket believed to have been used to wrap her body. Hair samples collected from these items are currently undergoing testing at an FBI laboratory to confirm they do not belong to Amy or her family. Once confirmed, the samples will be sent to a specialized lab in California capable of extracting DNA from degraded and aged samples. This advanced testing could potentially identify individuals who had contact with these items. Ongoing efforts and community involvement. Bay Village Police. Detective Sergeant J.E. Leash has expressed optimism regarding these technological advancements, stating that new DNA tests on the horizon could identify profiles from minimal samples. The community continues to support the investigation through initiatives like the Amy Mihaljevic Memorial Run and Walk, which raises funds for ongoing forensic testing and awareness efforts. As forensic science continues to evolve, These new technologies offer a renewed sense of hope that justice for Amy Mihaljevic may finally be within reach. The abduction and murder of 10-year-old Amy Mihaljevic in 1989 sent shockwaves through the Bay Village community and beyond. The case garnered national attention, and the public's response has been one of sustained concern, remembrance, and a collective desire for justice. Immediate community response. In the days following Amy's disappearance, the Bay Village community mobilized rapidly. Volunteers distributed flyers, organized search parties, and held vigils. The unprecedented nature of the crime in this quiet suburb led to heightened awareness and caution among residents. Parents became more vigilant, and schools implemented stricter safety protocols. National media coverage. The case received extensive media coverage, with national outlets reporting on the ongoing investigation. This widespread attention kept Amy's story in the public eye and maintained pressure on law enforcement agencies to solve the case. The media's role was instrumental in generating leads and keeping the community informed. Annual memorial events. To honor Amy's memory and keep the case in public consciousness, the community has organized annual events such as the Amy Mihaljevic Memorial Run and Walk. These events serve both as a tribute to Amy's life and as a means to raise awareness about child safety and unsolved crimes. Participation in these events has remained strong over the years, reflecting the community's enduring commitment to seeking justice. Ongoing public interest. Decades later, the public continues to show interest in Amy's case. Online forums, social media groups, and podcasts discuss developments and theories, demonstrating the case's lasting impact. This sustained engagement has been valuable in generating new leads and keeping the investigation active. The collective response to Amy Mihaljevic's tragic death underscores the community's resilience and determination. Through continued remembrance and advocacy, the public plays a crucial role in the ongoing pursuit of justice for Amy. Over the decades since Amy Mihaljevic's tragic death, the Bay Village community and beyond have taken significant steps to honor her memory and support the ongoing investigation into her case. Memorials and tributes. A memorial marker dedicated to Amy was installed near Bay Village City Hall shortly after her death. In 2017, local businesses and community members came together to restore this marker, ensuring that Amy's memory remains a visible part of the community landscape. Annual memorial events. The Amy Mihaljevic Memorial Run and Walk has become an annual event, drawing participants from across the region. In 2024, the event raised over $10,000 to support the ongoing investigation, with funds contributing to advanced DNA testing and other forensic efforts. Community engagement. The community's commitment to seeking justice for Amy has remained steadfast. In 2024, on the 35th anniversary of her disappearance, residents gathered for a commemorative walk, demonstrating their enduring support for the Mihaljevic family and the investigation. Continued awareness. Media coverage and public interest in Amy's case have persisted, with numerous articles, documentaries, and online discussions keeping her story in the public eye. This sustained attention has been instrumental in generating new leads and maintaining momentum in the search for her killer. Through these collective efforts, Amy Mihaljevic's memory continues to inspire a community dedicated to justice and remembrance. As of May 2025, the investigation into Amy Mihaljevic's 1989 abduction and murder remains active, with law enforcement agencies employing advanced forensic technologies to analyze existing evidence. Advanced DNA testing. In April 2025, new developments emerged when investigators announced plans to conduct DNA testing on hair samples found on a curtain and blanket near Amy's body. These items were discovered approximately 300 yards from the crime scene and are believed to have been used to wrap her body. The hair samples are currently undergoing analysis at an FBI laboratory to confirm they do not belong to Amy or her family. Once verified, the samples will be sent to a specialized lab in California, capable of extracting DNA from degraded and aged samples. This advanced testing could potentially identify individuals who had contact with these items. Discovery of male DNA on clothing. In August 2024, scientists at DNA Labs International in Deerfield Beach, Florida, detected previously unidentified male DNA on Amy's sweatpants using the MVAC system, a specialized forensic vacuum designed to collect DNA from porous materials. However, the amount of DNA obtained was insufficient to create a full profile. Rachel Uffeline, Chief Scientific Officer at DNA Labs International, noted that emerging technologies might soon allow for the analysis of such minimal samples. Community involvement. The Bay Village community continues to support the investigation through initiatives like the Amy Mihaljevic Memorial Run and Walk, which raises funds for ongoing forensic testing and awareness efforts. Participation in these events has remained strong over the years, reflecting the community's enduring commitment to seeking justice. Despite the passage of time, law enforcement remains committed to solving Amy Mihaljevic's case. The integration of new technologies and persistent investigative work sustain hope that justice will eventually be served. As of May 2025, the investigation into Amy Mihaljevic's 1989 abduction and murder remains active. Law enforcement agencies continue to employ advanced forensic technologies to analyze existing evidence, seeking to identify her killer. Ongoing forensic efforts. In April 2025, investigators announced plans to conduct DNA testing on hair samples found on a curtain and blanket near Amy's body. These items, discovered approximately 300 yards from the crime scene, are believed to have been used to wrap her body. The hair samples are currently undergoing analysis at an FBI laboratory to confirm they do not belong to Amy or her family. Once verified, the samples will be sent to a specialized lab in California, capable of extracting DNA from degraded and aged samples. This advanced testing could potentially identify individuals who had contact with these items. Additionally, in August 2024, scientists at DNA Labs International in Deerfield Beach, Florida, detected previously unidentified male DNA on Amy's sweatpants using the MVAC system, a specialized forensic vacuum designed to collect DNA from porous materials. However, the amount of DNA obtained was insufficient to create a full profile. Rachel Uffeline, Chief Scientific Officer at DNA Labs International, noted that emerging technologies might soon allow for the analysis of such minimal samples. Community involvement. The Bay Village community continues to support the investigation through initiatives like the Amy Mihaljevic Memorial Run and Walk, which raises funds for ongoing forensic testing and awareness efforts. Participation in these events has remained strong over the years, reflecting the community's enduring commitment to seeking justice. Despite the passage of time, law enforcement remains committed to solving Amy Mihaljevic's case. The integration of new technologies and persistent investigative work sustain hope that justice will eventually be served.